Chapter 281. Melf's Minute Meteor. The biggest significance of this spell for Soren was that it could break through the defense of almost any enemy, whether it was a dragon, a demon, a devil, a demigod lich, or a god descended from a saint. Melf's Minute Meteor could break through the protective force field on their bodies and cause a certain amount of damage to these enemies. Perhaps the damage was not high because these enemies had quite a terrifying damage reduction, and some could even reach more than 90%. However, as long as it could cause damage, it meant that the enemy could be killed. The last thing that was needed was a tactical arrangement. In the past, many guilds joined forces to slay the gods, and they used this grade 3 spell to open the way. Pure-blooded dragons were immune to most physical attacks that did not have armor-piercing properties. High-grade demons and devils were immune to ordinary weapon attacks. In theory, demigod-level liches could be immune to at most +3 rare weapon attacks, and the gods who descended in the form of saints could be strengthened by the power of the law. Only rare items of +5 or above could break through their protective field. After all, legendary items were too rare. There were even fewer weapons that could reach the legendary level. These weapons were all famous equipment, and most of them were in the hands of powerful storyline natives. Therefore, the ability of Melf's Minute Meteor to break through the defense had a strategic position. And the damage reduction of this spell was very little, and it could cause full damage to many enemies. Therefore, it was also known as the easiest god-slaying element to obtain. For Soren, getting the scroll of Melf's Minute Meteor was a complete surprise. Because this spell could cause full damage to the spirits. In theory, it could break through the defensive force field of a demigod spirit and eventually kill some demigod spirits that were difficult to deal with. In addition, it belonged to a spell that was close to being lost. It was born before the Arcane Empire, and it was still in the hands of a few wizards. Soren carefully put away the scroll. Then he looked at Vivian in front of him and motioned the little girl to go out with him. The nearby buildings were connected together, but they had already been damaged quite badly. There was basically no breath of life here. Soren walked around a little, and after finding no other hidden compartments, he approached the wizard tower. It was very troublesome to search the entire ruins carefully. Soren didn't have so much time now, so he could only explore the situation here first. It was unknown when. There was a trace of gray mist rising nearby. When Soren walked to the periphery of the settlement, he could not help but tremble. Because he saw a round ball. No. It shouldn't be called a sphere but a cover. It looked like a glass cover and inside it was a wide shelf. There was a skeleton on the shelf, but it didn't look like a human. It had sharp fangs, thick bones, horns on its head, feet like a cow, and a pair of bone wings extending from both sides of its spine. Soren recognized what it was. Because he had seen this kind of skeleton several times in the past, but it was all in the abyss of hell. In front of him was a demon skeleton, and it was a high-tier demon that was hard to deal with. If Soren remembered correctly, it was one of the hardest demons to deal with, the Baler. Challenge rating 16, creature level 21 and above. Large otherworld creature, chaotic, transdimensional, evil. It was a creature on the same level as a dragon. The Baler that Soren was familiar with was one of the strongest Balers. Who is the owner of this wizard tower? Soren couldn't help but stop, and at the same time reached out to stop the curious Vivian. He whispered, "It's the skeleton of a Baler, and it looks like it's been dead for a long time. The owner of this wizard tower should be a very powerful legendary arcanist. This Baler was obviously captured or summoned by him, and then forcibly imprisoned inside." He hadn't even gotten close to the wizard tower, and he already saw this thing. Soren's heart sank, and he felt that everything in front of him was beyond his ability to deal with. A legendary wizard. A very terrifying existence. A legendary arcanist. An existence that was comparable to the gods. If someone told Soren that there was an army of golems in this wizard tower, he would probably believe it. This was because the battle that made the legendary sword saint famous, the Battle of Golems, was because someone accidentally activated the defense mechanism of a high-grade wizard tower. At that time, there were more than 10 diamond golems, more than 100 steel golems, more than 100 puppet golems, as well as hundreds of clay golems, stone golems, and iron golems. Let's stop here. Soren stood in front of the skeleton of the Baler for a long time, and then said in a low voice, "Vivian, let's stop here. I have a bad feeling that the danger here is beyond our expectations. It's best to wait for Gloria to come. After all, she knows more about the wizard tower than we do. Maybe she can enter without activating the defense mechanism." They couldn't just barge in. Neither Soren nor Vivian could be sure that there was a defense lock here. To put it simply, they didn't know enough to tell if there was something like an 8 trigrams formation in front of them. If they rushed in recklessly, they might be hit by a disintegrate spell or be teleported into another dimension. The simplest way to understand the defense lock was that it was a fantasy version of the 8 trigrams formation. If you couldn't find a way out of the formation, you could only force your way out. Brother, look over there. Vivian nodded her head lightly. Although there was another voice in her head that was clamoring that a mere Magus tower was nothing, and that she could destroy it in a matter of minutes, the little girl still forcibly suppressed the arrogant troublemaker who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Vivian's intuition told her that there was danger ahead. She would never allow Lillian to rush in recklessly. The little girl looked around, and as the fog in front of her faded a little, she seemed to have seen something. Brother, the plants over there are strange. Plants? Soren heard her and looked over. His eyesight was not as good as Vivian's. It was not a matter of vision but the difference in strength between the two. Soren still used the eyes of a mortal to see things, but Vivian used the vision of a saint to see things. The power of divinity could see through some of the fog. However, Soren now also had a weak divinity. He gradually saw through the fog in front of him and saw some strange plants. They were very familiar. Because these plants were very similar to the mutated man-eating plants he saw in the material plane. They didn't grow randomly like in the material plane. Instead, they were more like fixed in certain areas. If the picture of their growth and distribution was like something, Soren felt that it was like a man-made garden, where the owner planted them in different places in the garden. In front of him was like the front yard of a mansion. Chapter 282. Big Brother? Vivian narrowed her eyes and carefully observed the area in front of her. She then signaled Soren to carry her and said in a crisp voice, "Big Brother, carry me. I think I saw a small path over there. It's to the left of the garden, near the pile of rocks. I think there's a small path over there, but I don't know where it leads to." There's a small path. Hearing this, Soren immediately picked up the little girl next to him, and then directly put Vivian on his shoulder. A pair of small feet stepped on Soren's left shoulder, and then a small white hand wrapped around his head. After carefully observing that side for a while, she whispered, "We can go around from the left. There doesn't seem to be any fog there, but we don't know where it leads to." The fog in front of them should be part of the defense lock. Just like how there was fog in the 8 trigrams formation, many defense locks would have corresponding illusions. These illusions could only be seen through by the golden gaze fiery eyes. Otherwise, it could only be dispelled by spells, special abilities and divine power. It seemed like the power here had weakened a lot. Otherwise, a real defense lock would create illusions instead of just fog. Even a defense lock set up by a lich could create a dark sky canopy, let alone one set up by an arcanist. "Let's go." Soren didn't hesitate for too long. He immediately said, "Let's go around and take a look." He didn't dare to enter the defense lock directly because he was careful, cautious, and worried about Vivian's safety. However, if he didn't even dare to explore the side entrance, then he didn't have the courage to take the risk. Taking a risk was always risky. Soren knew that the risk wouldn't exceed the limit of his strength, not that he didn't dare to take any risks at all. It seemed like the path on the side had been destroyed by time. Even if there was any danger, it wouldn't be more dangerous than going through it directly. This way he could also estimate the difficulty of going through it directly. Be careful. Soren put little Vivian down and began to pay attention to the surroundings. He even tapped the ground with the tip of his foot from time to time. He was detecting if there were any traps nearby. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be any, but he still felt that it was necessary to be more careful. The path passed through the corner of the garden. There was a pile of broken stones on the side. There were no strange plants nearby, but there were traces of cracks on the ground. Sauron looked around and whispered, "Vivian, you're right. Don't you think this road is a bit like the road to the backyard?" This was Soren's intuition. Judging from the layout of the surroundings, this was the front yard of the wizard tower. Since the path was from the side, it looked like it led to the backyard or to the kitchen or something like that. Arcanists had a large number of servants, unlike wizards who only needed golems to serve them. During the time of the Arcane Empire, wizards were the ruling class. Other than having a large number of servants, they also had a certain number of followers. A little. Vivian nodded gently. There seemed to be 2 different worlds in front of him. On the right was a strange garden surrounded by fog, and on the left was a ruin with many broken stones without fog. Soren took Vivian through the place carefully. When they walked about 300 meters, a well-preserved house appeared in front of them. This house had a very obvious feature, that was, it had a chimney. Generally speaking, houses with chimneys served the same purpose. Soren felt that he had guessed correctly at the beginning. "Brother." Vivian raised her hand and pulled Soren's sleeve, whispering, "It really looks like a kitchen." "Yes." Soren nodded gently and said, "Be careful. Let's go in and have a look." Creak. Soren pulled out his curved sword, icing death, and then gave Vivian behind him a look. Then he directly pushed open the door that had not yet decayed, and immediately there was a burst of dust. When Soren walked into the house with the little girl, he immediately found that it was covered with dust, nearly half a centimeter thick. No one knew how long it had been since a living person appeared. "Brother, look." After Vivian entered the house, she glanced around, then pointed to a chair in front of her and whispered, "There seems to be something over there." "Something?" Soren moved his feet alertly, then picked up a stone and threw it at the position of the chair. The force deflected it a little, and then they saw a rather short skeleton on the chair. The height of this skeleton was only about 1.25 meters, but the bones were quite thick compared to the height of the body, especially the position of the leg bones and the foot bones were larger. With such a bone shape, if an experienced person were to identify it, they would be able to tell at a glance what kind of creature it used to be. Soren glanced at it and whispered, "It's the skeleton of a halfling, maybe an Arcanist chef." Whoosh. Just as he finished speaking, a gust of cold wind suddenly blew through the almost sealed house. The cold wind caused people to shiver involuntarily. Then a series of sinister and strange laughter sounded. Undead? Vengeful spirit? Earthbound spirit? Soren's mind changed several times in an instant, then he protected Vivian behind him and said in a deep voice, "It's a spirit-type enemy. It looks like an earthbound spirit. Be careful. It should be watching us from the spirit realm now. Let's wait for it to appear before attacking." Undead-type enemies. The more common ones were the skeletal undead that they encountered in the outside world. This kind of undead had a body, so it was easier to deal with. The other kind was the one in front of them, which was born from ghosts and evil spirits. It belonged to the category of monsters without a body or a semi-energy form. This kind of undead was more difficult to deal with, and normal physical attacks did not have much effect on them. Kikik. Sad and strange laughter came from all directions. Soren's expression did not change, but Vivian seemed to be a little unhappy. She snorted and said, "I hate you undead the most. Get the hell out here." A faint light of magic appeared. Protection from evil. Vivian first cast a level 1 spell, Protection from Evil, and then continued to cast spells. Detect undead. An invisible light of magic appeared and covered the whole house in an instant. Then behind a wall, a shadow in the shape of dark red light appeared. Most of the undead creatures were dark red under the detection of magic, which meant that they were very evil. If it was a paladin, they would have to destroy them. Immobilize undead. Another light of magic appeared. Vivian raised her hand and pointed at the undead in the distance. Then a faint light appeared, followed by a shrill howl. All of a sudden, the undead behind the wall seemed to have gone berserk, and charged towards Vivian ferociously. The control spell had failed, and the enemy had passed the test of immunity, so Vivian was identified as the first target. Shang. The curved sword in Soren's hand was instantly unsheathed, and then he slashed at the half-illusory earthbound spirit. Shadow Strike. The legendary curved sword Icing Death had ice damage, which had a special effect on the undead. Although physical attacks were almost ineffective against it, the rogue's Shadow Strike was useful. It was a type of shadow energy damage. Soren's curved sword instantly hit the earthbound spirit that rushed over. It felt like hitting cotton candy. The blade directly passed through the earthbound spirit's body. Only the ice energy and shadow energy hurt the earthbound spirit. The physical damage caused by the attack was estimated to be 1 or 2 points. Fear, instant cast. As a high-level undead creature, the earthbound spirit had a very special ability. It could instantly cast a fear-type spell. It could be intimidation, fear, or even a spell like the Robe of Fear. However, when the earthbound spirit in front of it threw out the fear spell, it was a little dumbfounded because the 2 people in front of it seemed to completely ignore the fear spell. There was no need for them to pass the test of fear at all. Yes, they directly ignored the fear spell. There was no need to mention Vivian. She was the son of fear, so how could she not be immune to a mere fear spell? As for Soren, his resistance to the fear spell was also quite high. Not to mention his accumulated strong will, just absorbing the divinity of fear was enough to make him immune to the fear spell cast by non-legendary enemies. Dominate humans? The earthbound spirit in front of them seemed to have a certain level of intelligence. After knowing that the fear spell did not work, it immediately changed its tactics. It cast a talent spell, Dominate Humans, trying to control Soren, who looked like a warrior, and then use him to kill the little girl who made it feel dangerous. However, it miscalculated again because the dominate humans it cast did not have any effect at all. It was directly immune to Soren's strong will. What a joke. He had experienced so many storms along the way, how could he be easily controlled by others? Didn't Soren walk barefoot for thousands of miles in order to be able to deal with the current situation at all times? As long as his will was strong enough, he would be immune to most charm, mind, and control spells in the future. This was very important for a rogue whose immunity was lower than a warrior's. A will as strong as steel. This was the most important factor for Soren's survival. So when he successfully resisted the dominate humans, cast by the earthbound spirit in front of him, a trace of killing intent appeared in his eyes, and he once again swung his sword at the enemy in front of him. Shadow Strike. Chapter 283. The curved sword once again went through the enemy's body. Although the earthbound spirit's body wasn't made of flesh and blood, it felt as if he was cutting through jelly. He didn't feel any force at all. However, the shadow energy condensed by Shadow Strike still affected its body, and at the same time, the legendary curved sword Icing Death stained it with a cold silver-white color. This was because Soren's weapon was not high-end enough. With a weapon enchanted with advanced elements, it could easily take away half of the earthbound spirit's HP. Summon the undead. Phantom Mirror Image. After being hit several times by Soren and suffering from Shadow Strike twice, the earthbound spirit finally felt the threat of death. A strange light of magic appeared in its eyes, and then its figure split into 5, becoming 5 almost identical figures that appeared in the same place. This was not the wizard's shadow creation, because shadow creation made the same movements and could only be used to confuse lower-level enemies. However, the earthbound spirit in front of them turned into 5 phantoms that made completely different movements. It was almost impossible to recognize them at a glance. Creak. The sound of bones trembling could be heard in the house. In the small room that Soren did not go in to check, there was a series of strange sounds. Then, skeletons appeared one after another. Among them there were large and small skeletons. There were almost no skeletons of the same race. After they woke up, their pupils emitted the light of the undead, and then they rushed out to Soren and the others in front of them. "Brother, get out of the way." Vivian's voice sounded behind Soren. When he heard the little girl's voice, Soren immediately jumped back without hesitation, and at the same time, lifted the table with his foot to block in front of him. Because he felt a burning breath behind him. When Soren lifted the table in front of him, Vivian also raised her hand and cast a fireball. Boom. There was a violent explosion. The whole house shook as if it was going to collapse. Fireball was not to be underestimated. After all, it was also a grade 3 spell. When a high-grade wizard cast it, it was almost as lethal as a howitzer. Back then, the 5 Fireballs Divine Sect had used it to open up a path. Even the city gates had been blown up. The heat wave from the explosion spread out. A crater appeared on the ground, and the flames ignited the other things in the room. Some of the things that were relatively well preserved were immediately set ablaze. But this was just the beginning. Vivian didn't stop after casting the first fireball. She immediately threw out the second fireball and then the third. By the time the little girl's continuous fireball spell ended, the scene in front of them was about to turn into ruins. The undead summoned by the earthbound spirit were all dead, and there were only 2 illusions left, both of which were about to dissipate. Harvest it. Soren's eyes lit up. He was ready to take advantage of this opportunity to kill the enemy and gain some slaughter EXP. However, Vivian reached out to stop him. "Brother?" The little girl shouted and said hurriedly, "Don't kill it. I'll imprison its soul. It seems like it still retains a certain amount of intelligence. Perhaps there's a way to get some information about the Adept Tower from it?" Soren withdrew his sword in an instant and almost brushed past the earthbound spirit as he retreated. Imprison its soul? This was a very difficult thing to do. Although there were many supernatural powers in this world and there were many powerful gods and so on, the realm of the soul was still a very mysterious and unknown thing in this world. Any spell related to the soul was at least a level 5 spell, and any spell related to the soul was at least a level 7 spell. There were even some special spells that could only be cast by legendary wizards. Soren's soul was in a weakened state, and it required a level 5 restoration spell to repair it. One could imagine the power needed to touch the realm of the soul. Vivian's power was enough. She should now be a legendary sorcerer and a low-grade wizard, which was undoubtedly very powerful in terms of power. But when did the little girl learn soul spells? In Soren's memory, it seemed that Vivian had been sleeping recently. Occasionally she would read books or practice her spell-casting ability. She didn't learn many spell scrolls, so how did she suddenly learn soul spells? Hold the Undead. Vivian's movements were very careful. She still used Hold the Undead, again in the face of the violent earthbound spirit. This time the earthbound spirit did not pass the immunity and directly stayed stiff in place. Clap. The little girl patted her white little hands, and her expression seemed to be a lot more relaxed. She said in a crisp voice, "Brother, there's no problem now. It can't move for the time being. We have to quickly find something that it used when it was alive." Something that it used? Soren frowned, then walked in the direction where he found the skeleton. He looked around, picked up the skeleton, and finally threw a wine bottle that looked like an iron kettle to the little girl. He looked around carefully and wondered, "Is this okay? I found it next to his body." Halflings were addicted to alcohol. Thinking about Aladdin's alcohol tolerance, one would know that they actually liked to drink very much. Vivian reached out and took a look. Then a light of magic appeared on her fingertips and she said happily, "Yes. It's something that it used when it was alive." Soul Shackle. Vivian began to cast quickly. This time the spell was very long and took nearly half a minute. During this time, there was a lot of demonic language that Soren could not understand at all. However, he could still see the effect of the spell. He saw a soul mark appear on the wine bottle, and then Vivian raised her hand and pointed. Some kind of demonic power began to work, turning the earthbound spirit in front of them into a soul form, and then sucked it into the wine bottle in front of them. "Okay." Vivian patted her little hands and said in a crisp voice, "It's a pity that I don't know Soul Shackle. Otherwise I can just use a gem to imprison it." "Brother. We can interrogate him now." The little girl picked up the jug and snapped her fingers. Then a translucent soul shadow appeared in the room. It was a halfling with a long beard. He seemed to be in a daze and didn't seem to have much consciousness. When he was summoned by Vivian, he began to be in a daze. After a while he suddenly said, "Master. I was wrong. Master. Don't punish me. Please. Don't punish me." "What happened? Where did Master go?" "Run. Everyone run." Chapter 284. Memories of Death. When Soren saw the scene in front of him and heard the words of the undead, he had already realized what was happening in front of him. This was because he had seen such a scene before. When an undead was restored to its soul form, it was possible for it to recover part of its memory. At this time it would remember some things. This kind of memory was mainly focused on the period before death because the soul could only remember very few things. This situation was a bit like when a soul entered the abyss of hell and was reincarnated, it would also forget part of its memory in the material plane. Souls were similar to currency for many beings. Many low-level demons in the abyss and the Bator Inferno were reincarnated from the fallen souls in the material plane. Only the worst souls and those who had given up on themselves would be directly sent to the river Styx. Of course, this kind of reincarnation was to reshape the soul. If anyone had seen paper making, they would have a deep impression of it. The souls were directly piled up, then crushed into powder and finally sent to the machine to make new sheets of white paper. The voice of the earthbound spirit gradually faded. He seemed to have remembered something and suddenly began to cry. After crying for a while, his expression became dull again. He just stared at Vivian and Soren in a daze. He didn't retain many memories because he had died a long time ago. Some people always couldn't tell the difference between souls and undead. In fact, the two couldn't be classified as the same. A soul was a pure body of energy. A soul could become an undead, but an undead wasn't a pure soul. Almost all undead were close to evil because they were born with a strong obsession. This obsession was often full of aggression and resentment towards the living. Therefore, most detection spells would be close to blood red when they encountered an undead. Undead were existences that violated the rules of death, but souls were part of the rules. Strictly speaking, the rules here might be longer than the teachings of many gods. But in a simpler way, the earthbound spirit in front of them was an undead in the beginning. Now he was a soul that had lost most of his memories. Expiation. Perhaps this word was simpler to describe. Vivian's transcendence was not a kind and righteous release, but a forceful and tyrannical method to seal the soul. It was equivalent to killing the part of the soul that belonged to the undead, and sealing the part that belonged to the soul in the wine pot. Therefore, the soul in front of him was considered to have been transcended. As long as the spell sealing it in the wine pot was removed, its soul could return to the river Styx. This kind of soul had already lost too much of its power, and it was difficult for an impure soul to have too many choices. Death is not necessarily the beginning. Pure souls, regardless of whether they were good or evil, would always have new opportunities placed before them. Brother? Vivian picked up the iron jug and glanced at the undead in front of her. What's your name? The undead, Vivian sighed and looked at Soren. It even forgot its own name. It seems like it has really lost itself. I don't know how much it still remembers from the wizard tower. Forgetting his own name. This meant that the soul was about to lose itself. Names were very important, so Vivian's first question was this. Vivian held the jug and continued to ask, where is this place? What's around here? How do I get to the wizard tower? The undead, the little girl asked 3 questions in a row, but the undead was still in a daze. She couldn't help but feel a little discouraged. This made her feel that her initial decision was wrong. This undead was completely useless after its soul was sealed. It didn't remember much at all. Even the memories of its death were just a bunch of mindless words. Give me the jug. Soren spoke at this time. He gestured Vivian to give him the jug, then held it and asked, where's the kitchen? The jug was a phylactery. It was something similar to a phylactery. Only by holding it could one control the undead in front of them. Compared to Vivian's question, Soren's question was the simplest one. It was so simple that it seemed useless. Thus, under the little girl's puzzled gaze, the undead in front of her was a little stunned. It then led Soren to the second room at the back. There were 3 rooms here, which should be the kitchen, the storage room, and the last room of unknown use. Soren nodded with satisfaction and followed it. He seemed to have noticed the little girl's puzzled expression, so he opened his mouth and said, it seems that he was indeed a chef of the Adept Tower when he was alive. If the Arcanist who once owned this Adept Tower was not a crazy researcher who only needed to use magic to create food to satisfy his needs, then he must have needed a chef. During the Arcane Empire, life was all about luxury and pleasure. This wizard tower is one of the typical examples. All the buildings nearby were built for the servants of the Arcanist. Vivian was only 9 years old this year after all. Soren said so much to guide her thoughts and use practical actions to teach her how to deal with things. The undead stopped in front of the second room. Then its expression became blank again. However, Soren seemed to be thinking about something. He looked around and continued, prepare the food. After hearing Soren's words, a slight change appeared in the undead's eyes. It then began to move mechanically. In fact, it didn't pick up anything. It was just repeating the action of making food. In the end, it even filled up a pile of air like it was holding a plate. As the chef of the wizard tower, what he did the most was preparing food. Therefore, it was the easiest thing for the undead to remember. Even if it had almost forgotten, the instinctive habit would still be branded in the depths of its soul. Just like the undead guards in some places, they would still patrol the ruins even after they had forgotten everything. This was what Soren had learned in the past. Very good. Soren smiled and said in a deep voice, send the food up. The critical moment had arrived. This house was built independently on the side of the wizard tower. It wasn't directly connected to the wizard tower. In fact, it was impossible to build a kitchen next to the wizard tower. Just thinking about it made one feel uncomfortable. Therefore, there must be a path to the wizard tower. This path should be quite safe. It should avoid the defense mechanism and the defense mechanism. The undead was stunned for a moment. Then its expression changed. It stopped for a moment and walked towards the back door as if it was carrying something. Hurry up and follow it. Soren quickly called out to Vivian and said in a deep voice, it should be taking the safe path. Let's follow it and remember the path to the wizard tower. According to normal eating habits, a person needed to eat 3 meals a day. Even if it was only 1 meal a day, the undead must have walked this path thousands of times before it died. Therefore, even if it had lost its memory, it could still remember the path. The 2 of them quickly followed after him. After the undead walked out from the back door, it immediately entered the area covered by the fog. However, it was at the edge. Soren and Vivian followed closely behind it. When it moved, the 2 moved. When it stopped, the 2 also stopped. At the same time, Soren used his eidetic memory to memorize the path and the surrounding environment. He was also prepared to fight at any time. However, they didn't encounter any battle. The 2 followed the undead for about 200 meters in the fog. Then they seemed to have passed through a corridor. Everything in front of them opened up. They arrived in front of the wizard tower. At this moment, they were less than 30 meters away from the wizard tower. They could clearly see the traces of time on the tower. There seemed to be a side door on the left. The undead didn't stop. It directly walked towards the side door. Because of its different form, it directly went through the door. Soren immediately followed it. He wanted to see if he could open the door. However, Vivian immediately reached out and pulled him back. Her small face was full of seriousness and she said in a serious voice, "Brother, be careful. There seems to be something behind the door." As soon as the little girl finished speaking, with a creak, the heavy side door in front of them opened. Then they saw the undead walking up the stairs. However, it didn't move at all. There was also a creature that looked like a construct. Its body was made of metal parts. Beside it were two huge and heavy diamond golems. When they noticed Soren approaching, they simultaneously came to life and approached the side door. Soul scan. It looked like a mechanical construct. Its head was golden. It seemed to be mixed with adamantine and other materials. In its eye sockets were two golden gems. After discovering Soren's presence, two rays of light shot out and enveloped them. At the same time, it said in a metallic voice, "No soul imprint left. An unauthorized visitor. Alert level 1 alert. Anyone who approaches without permission will be treated as an intruder. Thaling number 7 has taken over command. Construct spawn activated. Target 1's danger level is E. Target 2's danger level is C. No need to activate magic armor. Mana crystal pulse cannon decharging. Diamond golems activated. Activating order to expel or kill intruder. Diamond golems charged. Order activated." The series of changes was dazzling. There seemed to be a faint flash of light at the top of the wizard tower. It seemed that something had just turned. Then heavy footsteps were heard. Two diamond golems that were about 3 meters tall and weighed more than a ton moved. Their eyes were shining with energy. They walked towards Soren and Vivian. Chapter 285. Shit. The corner of Soren's eyes twitched, and he pulled Vivian back almost immediately. At the same time, he handed the jug to her and said in a deep voice, "Summon that soul back. Let's retreat and leave this place first." Diamond golem. And there were two of them at once. It seemed like the defense mechanism of this place was beyond Soren's expectations. Under normal circumstances, the diamond golem was regarded as the top fighter of the wizard tower, but here it was the first tool to be used. One had to know that any diamond golem was a legendary construct, and it was also one of the most difficult golem to deal with. How difficult was it to deal with? Looking at the statistics in Soren's memory, he knew a thing or two. Diamond golem, golem, grade 5. Challenge rating 16, rune level 21, has spell-like abilities. Highest and lowest attributes 25, lowest attributes 10, total attributes 90 to 100. Special abilities: crushing damage, damage reduction, magic resistance, poison attack. Resistance statistics: 100 points of strong acid resistance, 100 points of cold resistance, 100 points of lightning resistance, 125 points of fire resistance. 90 points of crush resistance, 90 points of pierce resistance, 90 points of slashing resistance, 90 points of range resistance. Magic resistance 100. Damage immunity: immune to normal weapon attacks, immune to +1 rare weapon attacks, immune to +2 rare weapon attacks, immune to poison attacks, immune to backstab attacks. Difficulty: A++. Diamond golem. Under normal circumstances, it was the most difficult golem to deal with. It had around 90 points of physical resistance, and was immune to most physical attacks below 90 points. At the same time, it had more than 100 points of resistance to cold, acid, lightning, fire, and also 100 points of magic resistance. To put it simply, any elemental damage below 100 points or spell damage below 100 points would have no effect on them at all. They couldn't break through their defense at all. This was close to the highest level of golem. Only legendary wizards could create them, and they were very expensive because the core material to create them was diamond golem. It was also commonly known as diamond golem, the original body of a diamond. That's right. This was a golem that used diamond golem as its core material, and only the richest legendary wizards could create them. Damn it. That was why Soren ran away as soon as he saw them. With his current strength, even if he used all his strength, he would only be able to barely break through their defense. One could imagine the scene of him using a sword to cut a diamond. Then one could understand how powerless he was right now. This was an existence that made many rogues helpless in the past. They could only rely on the special terrain to find ways to exhaust them to death. But now there was certainly no way to use the terrain because the surroundings were quite empty, and it seemed that there was more than one enemy. Soren turned around and ran with Vivian. The little girl held the wine jug and chanted a sentence in the demonic language. Then she saw that the sluggish soul in the room disappeared, and a faint magic light appeared on the wine jug. Heavy footsteps could be heard coming from behind them. 2 diamond golems that weighed more than a ton stepped out. Soren didn't even need to look at them to know that their strength was over 25 points. Conservatively speaking, 3 of their attributes were over 20 points. Don't think that all puppet golems are heavy and slow. When you see the diamond golem, you will discover that it is running faster than you. Haste. Vivian obviously realized this as well. She raised her hand and cast a haste spell, then continued to cast another spell, grease. A greasy liquid suddenly covered the ground. Although this did not have any obvious effect, it still slightly affected their sense of balance at first, and then it was useless at all. Let's go. Soren picked up Vivian's petite body and then said in a deep voice, stone to mud is effective on them. They couldn't fight the diamond golems head-on. With their current strength they had little chance of winning. After all, in Gloria's wizard tower, there was only a batch of steel golems. In terms of strength, the steel golems were not even enough to carry the shoes of the diamond golems. Any diamond golem in front of them could break all the steel golems made by Gloria into pieces of iron. To deal with this kind of puppet golem that was close to the top, they could only use tricks. Go. The speed of the diamond golems was a little slower because the ground under their feet suddenly turned into a mud pit, and then their legs went down a little first, but they soon climbed out. Soren had already rushed out a short distance. When a fog appeared in front of him, he suddenly stopped and closed his eyes to think for a moment, then rushed directly into it. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Soren's brain was like a high-speed supercomputer. What he saw in front of him was not just fog, gravel, and enemies, but pictures like pictures. The picture was the scene when the Revenant took them through the edge of the maze at the beginning. Everything that he saw was like a high-speed camera imprinted in Soren's brain. With the help of eidetic memory, encyclopedic knowledge, and sage, all of it was extracted at this moment. This was a very thrilling moment. Although it looked very normal, it was just Soren walking through the fog and running outside little by little. But in fact, if he took a wrong step, there was a possibility that he would trigger the defense mechanism of the maze, and then be directly trapped in the formation. Then the 2 diamond golems would catch up with them. As for whether they could win in the end and what they would face after barely defeating the 2 diamond golems, these were all things that Soren could not predict. But fortunately none of this happened. Soren's temporary memory was extracted at the crucial moment. Even if he only walked once, he completely remembered the route, and then successfully passed through the edge of the maze without triggering any defense mechanism. The sound of heavy footsteps was getting further away. When Soren returned to the original position of the house, a faint light flashed in the eyes of the 2 diamond golems, and then they turned around and returned to the side door. The target had been expelled. Their range of defense was around the side door, and Thaling 7 did not give them the order to chase after the target. Everything gradually calmed down. Soren hugged Vivian's petite body, took a breath, and then put her down. He turned around and looked at the wizard tower behind him, then reached out his hand and patted the little girl's head and slowly said, "Let's go. Let's leave this place. This is not a place that we can explore yet." Soren immediately went into stealth mode and signaled Vivian to cast an invisibility spell on himself. Thump 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 thump. He couldn't tell what the sound was, but it gradually became the sound of wings flapping in the wind. From the sound, it seemed that the creatures approaching were very large and there were many of them. Otherwise the sound wouldn't be so obvious. Soren led Vivian to a secluded corner, and the 2 of them looked up at the sky at the same time. Shadows began to appear above their heads, and they gradually approached the wizard tower. "It's a shadow raven." Soren frowned and looked at it with a serious expression. He then explained to Vivian in his arms, "It's one of the species that lives in the shadow plane. It has a certain level of intelligence, almost as smart as a chimpanzee. It's very difficult to deal with. It lives in some parts of the shadow plane and likes to live in large groups. Sometimes they even dare to fight with a shadow dragon." Shadow raven. What appeared in front of them was a huge bird that was 8 meters long with a wingspan of 6 meters. From the outside it didn't look much like a raven. It was a special kind of mutated life form. The origin of its appearance was unknown, but it was definitely related to the Arcane Empire. There were many taboo experiments that eventually led to the appearance of many mutated species. Shadow ravens had sharp beaks and claws. They lived in flocks in the shadow plane and were the top predators here. They were level 16 mutated creatures. A flock of shadow ravens dared to challenge an adult shadow dragon. The scene in front of them was a bit strange. The shadow ravens circled around the wizard tower, but they didn't dare to get close to the magic lock. They circled around again and again, making unpleasant croaking sounds, and then flew back to where they came from. This scene made Soren a bit confused, but he still remembered it. The shadow ravens wouldn't come here for no reason. There must be something here that attracted them. In addition, he further confirmed his guess. There must be some kind of anti-air defense mechanism near the wizard tower. Maybe it was the mana crystal pulse cannon. That was why the shadow ravens flew around the wizard tower but didn't dare to get close. Brother? Vivian stretched out her white little hand and patted Soren, whispering, I think I've seen that thing in a book. It said that it can be tamed into a flying mount. But they look so ugly. It's not cool to sit on them. Taming ravens? It seemed like something that could be done. It was similar to taming wyverns. But it was too time-consuming. Unless there was some kind of special inheritance, taming these creatures was not worth the cost. In the Orc Kingdom near the northwest, even if there were tens of millions of people, the number of wyverns that could be tamed was less than 300. These mounts could eat 3 sheep in a day. The cost of keeping them in captivity was quite shocking. Soren hadn't thought about this yet. To him, the most important thing was to build 2 fleets. The 2 of them waited for a while. After the flock of shadow ravens flew away, they continued to look for the shadow rift. Soren spent almost an hour to find the location of the shadow rift. Many of these rifts weren't fixed, unless a wizard built a stable teleportation circle. The 2 of them quickly returned to the material plane. Before leaving, Soren took a deep look at the wizard tower, then turned around and walked into the shadow rift. Vivian also looked at the wizard tower for a while, then clenched her little fist as if she had secretly made up her mind. In her mind, for the first time, Lillian was very honest and didn't act wildly. She also didn't clamor about how she could tear down the wizard tower in minutes. Perhaps she also realized that the difficulty of this wizard tower was higher than dealing with the demigod vampire. Note, Lillian likes to clamor about killing the demigod vampire. The scene in front of them gradually changed. Everything began to be colorful. After returning to the material plane, Soren squinted his eyes for a while to adapt to the changes in the surrounding colors. The sky in the shadow plane was gray. After staying in there for a while, it was visually shocking to see things outside. At this time, the sky was still dark. It was estimated that it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. Soren gave a few instructions to his confidants, then took Vivian's little hand and went back. Brother. The little girl was very obedient and followed behind. After thinking for a while, she looked up and said seriously, This wizard tower seems to be very powerful. I've read a lot of books about wizard towers, but I've never seen such a thing, and the lowest level is actually guarded by a diamond golem. If we can control it, I'm afraid that except for the gods, no one can threaten us. Vivian also noticed it. After all, she had read a lot of books. Since Gloria owned a wizard tower, she naturally collected a lot of books related to wizard towers. Soren didn't answer this question. He was still not sure whether this wizard tower could fight against the gods, but he was very sure of one thing. With the current strength of the 2 of them, even if Vivian was a legendary sorcerer, the possibility of taking down this wizard tower was less than 1 in 10. Even if they invited Gloria, their success rate was still only close to 1 in 10. This wizard tower could be understood as a super dungeon with a difficulty of level 25. Soren's mind now was roughly like this. He was a half-baked rogue and he was barely equivalent to a legendary rogue. Vivian was a half-baked legendary sorcerer, and with the help of divine power she could barely meet the standard of challenge difficulty. Then there was no then. In the team challenge mode, the legendary warrior who was responsible for the meat shield was still nowhere to be found. The legendary wizard who was responsible for the overall control was not qualified yet. The legendary priest who was responsible for protecting the healer and taking over the warrior's position was even more difficult to find. They didn't meet the standard of this wizard tower at all, and even if they had enough people, the success rate was only 50/50. Vivian was right. This could indeed be a sorcerer's tower that could rival the gods. Soren's mind was constantly calculating, and at the same time trying to recall some important information, but there were still very few clues he could think of. In the end, he could only reach out and touch the little girl's head and slowly said, "Let's wait for Gloria to come. I believe that with such a wizard tower here, she should be happy to come and see it." He had to invite Gloria to come over. She was the real professional expert. A northern witch who had received formal wizard education was much better than them, who were only dabblers. Vivian looked up and said, "Brother, when are you going to invite Sister Gloria to come over? Can you take me with you?" Soren hesitated for a moment, then squatted down and touched the little girl's head. He said softly, I'm afraid not this time. I'm going to go directly by sea in 2 days from the route of Shipwreck Bay to the north. After I leave, I need someone to guard this place. Maybe you need to stay here to deter those guys. Vivian, can you do this well? The little girl's face showed a hint of excitement and joy, then she nodded vigorously and said, yes. Brother, don't worry. With me here they will definitely be obedient. She was very happy, because she could finally help her brother like an adult, although she was only 9 years old this year. Chapter 287. Day 32 of Quitting Smoking, Willpower +1. Also, stop flirting with our deputy moderator. Her name is Nadi Xiang Tian. Finally, those who have votes can vote. The embodiment of justice, Stupa. There was a reason why Soren didn't let Vivian go with him. The Sons of Fear had the ability to perceive each other, and they could find each other after a certain distance, so Soren was a little worried about encountering the demigod vampire. He was now the most powerful Son of Fear, and he also had the form of a god. If they met him, there was almost no chance of winning. From this point of view, it was safest for Vivian to stay in the Outer Islands. After all, she was the first Son of Fear, and it could be said that she was the target that the demigod vampire wanted to kill the most. Seeing that they had already laid a foundation in the Outer Islands, Soren naturally didn't want to complicate things. As long as the base was established and then the drows were recovered, he could soon explore the outside world, and at the same time, make arrangements for Vivian to deal with the Dread Lord in the future. Although the demigod vampire was one step ahead of them in terms of situation, he was definitely not as good as them. As long as Soren's plan was successful, he would soon be able to overtake the other side. After all, the believers of the demigod vampire were vampires. From this point of view, it was an inherent disadvantage. The number of vampires could never be too many, which was not allowed by other forces. A day passed quickly. When Soren woke up the next day, there was a noise outside. He frowned and walked out, and then saw the half-elf first mate in front of him. Some of the men he sent out had returned, but the red-haired female pirate had not returned yet. The half-elf first mate brought back a lot of people, and behind him was a row of pirate minions carrying a lot of boxes, and then a group of shackled slaves, all gathered together. In addition, there was something that surprised Soren. It was a special cage, and there was a very petite figure in the cage. What was very eye-catching was that she had a pair of cat ears and a cat tail. Beast. Soren glanced at her in surprise and murmured, Catwoman? It seems to be a beast that is close to extinction? Where did you find it? The half-elf first mate bowed slightly, Your Excellency. When we went back, we accidentally received some news. Then, we found that the people you needed were in the hands of another fleet. So we took them back. This feline girl was an unexpected discovery. She seemed to have been brought back from the eastern countries. We're going to give her to Eldest Miss as a toy. Eldest Miss also needs a maid to serve her. Soren frowned when he heard that. He glanced at the feline girl next to him and looked away. Then he looked at the other pirates in front of him, mainly the slaves that were transported here. As an adventurer who had traveled across half of the world, Soren could tell at a glance that the slaves were of Eastern descent. Furthermore, from their facial features and hands, he could tell that many of them were Eastern craftsmen. Soren nodded and asked, How's the harvest? The half-elf first mate hesitated for a moment and then whispered, We captured a group of slaves and seized 3 large ocean-going ships. The loot that can be quickly sold is about 24,000 Kindler. Other valuable goods that are more difficult to sell, such as porcelain, tea, silk, and so on, are all stored in the warehouse on Snake Island. According to the manager's estimation, all the goods plus the 3 ocean-going ships should be worth about 120,000 Kindler. Soren's face showed a trace of surprise, then his expression became serious. He was surprised by the profit of this robbery. The return was a bit too high. Soren put his hands behind his back and turned a few times. Then, he pondered for a moment and looked up. Is it the pirate King Ashrod's goods? The half-elf first mate's forehead had a trace of cold sweat, then he carefully said, Yes. Who gave you the information? Soren frowned slightly and asked. The half-elf seemed to tremble and his voice was a little nervous. It's the Amazon women. They secretly sent someone to tell me that the craftsmen you need are on those ships. Soren closed his eyes and paused for a moment, then raised his hand and patted the half-elf first mate on the shoulder and said in a deep voice, You did a good job this time. Although the behavior was a bit reckless. But to be able to bring back so much profit, I must give you some rewards. From now on, the 3 ocean-going cargo ships will be under your command, and then I will allocate some manpower to you. From today onwards, You will be in charge of the trade between Port Tylon and the outer islands. Don't let me down. The half-elf first mate's face showed a hint of excitement. He knew very well that he made the right bet. Originally he commanded 2 warships and now he had 3 more cargo ships. It could be said that his current status and subordinates had completely surpassed the red-haired female pirate. But he hesitated for a moment and still said with some worry, "Your Excellency, we robbed the pirate King Ashrod's cargo ships. Will they retaliate against us?" Soren nodded faintly and said slowly, "Possibly. But when we dealt with the Swamp King, he also robbed us of the spoils on the Devil Island. This account will be settled with him sooner or later. Now it's just a little interest. You robbed his goods this time, and it's possible that he will retaliate against us. Tell the others to be careful during this period of time. When the time is right, we will destroy them in one fell swoop." The half-elf first mate nodded with a dignified expression, and there was a trace of ambition and excitement in his eyes. If he could destroy the pirate King Ashrod, Soren would dominate the south coast. His status would naturally rise, and he would be under one person and above thousands of people. The people below quickly retreated. Soren sat at the table and pondered for a moment, then called in a person and gave a few instructions. The half-elf first mate had returned, but there was no news of Adele Isabella. It seemed that the development of the guano stone was not very smooth. This time, Soren may need to go in person, but he also happened to be going to the north. Maybe he could find a wizard who knew alchemy and could process the guano stone into high-quality fertilizer. In addition, this time, his subordinates robbed the pirate King Ashrod's cargo ship. He was afraid that the pirate king would not let it go easily, and he might even attack him. However, if he wanted to deal with a large number of people, he would definitely not be able to hide it from the Sea Temple. So Soren thought that the possibility of Ashrod sending people to assassinate him was the highest. He had to make some preparations in advance. No one would have expected that Soren would be so careful and prepared in advance because his subordinates robbed the pirate king. Chapter 288. The half-elf first mate brought back some people, and the number of people in the camp suddenly increased a lot. Soren went out to check the goods he brought back, and then he ordered his men to supervise the slaves. After dealing with these things, he went back to his room and sat down. Soren closed his eyes and thought for a while, then he began to pick up a quill to write and draw. As a rogue, his fingers were quite steady. Even if he didn't use any tools when drawing, the straight lines he drew were like using tools. About 30 minutes later, Soren completed the first drawing. At a glance, one could see that it was an architectural drawing. The simple structure of the entire camp was drawn on it, as well as various internal and external layouts, including sewers, building distribution, statistics of the camp area, fence towers, and so on. After Soren finished all this, he began to write other parts, which were some of the construction arrangements and precautions. Among them, there were strict requirements such as sewers, toilet distribution and sanitation, as well as the division and construction of roads, etc. He specifically wrote them down in detail. The rainy season in the outer islands was very easy to accumulate water. If the town was built according to his requirements, if there were no specially designed sewers, then they would have to be prepared to deal with waterlogging. Sewers were actually very simple things. As long as they were properly distributed and dug deep, there would be no problem. The Roman period had a good understanding of this. But even so, many cities in this world didn't care about this simple point. So many cities were dirty, messy, and smelly. Although Soren wasn't a clean freak, he definitely didn't want his territory to become like that, especially the pirates who liked to urinate and defecate everywhere when they were drunk. So he had high requirements for hygiene. Even urinating was not allowed, and even the tools used to commit crimes were cut off. This was the outer islands, and the environment was more primitive and desolate than the mainland. If they didn't pay attention, it was easy to breed diseases. The pirates were better. They drifted on the sea all year round and their bodies were strong, but the slaves were not. If an infectious disease happened, it would be a great loss. Note: currently lacking doctors and medicine. After drawing the map of the camp, Soren began to draw a house. It was not a beautiful house, nor was it his own residence. Instead, it was a simple brick house, the kind that was commonly seen in the countryside. The area of a brick house was about 50 square meters. The beam structure was quite simple. It was a one-story bungalow. In front of the house was a drainage ditch and a four-way road. He requested to build more than 300 such houses, a total of 3 rows of houses, about 100 in each row. These houses were mainly built near the west gate and the south gate. The north gate was still a wooden house for the slaves. These buildings all had space reserved for them, so there was no need to rush to demolish the wooden houses that had just been constructed. After Soren finished drawing the blueprints of the houses, he proceeded to draw the layout of the roads. It wasn't just the four-way roads in the camp, but also the distribution of roads outside the camp. He needed his subordinates to build a road that directly connected to the natural harbor. The length of this road was about 5 kilometers. Under the current circumstances, the length of the roads could not be too high. As long as the roads were flat and not full of potholes, it would be fine. In the future, when there was enough manpower and material resources, they could repair them again. What Soren drew was the route of the road, avoiding areas where dangerous creatures might be active. Next was a new piece of paper. This time, Soren didn't draw anything. Instead, he wrote a letter to the drow priest. The content of the letter was needless to say. After Soren finished writing the letter, he asked someone to call Dark Blade, Andri, and then handed the letter to him and asked him to arrange for someone to bring it back. At the same time, he also brought back a batch of supplies, mainly daily necessities. This time, the half-elf first mate brought back 3 ships of supplies, enough to support them for more than half a year. In fact, Soren's calculation was very accurate. After deducting the time needed for the current arrangements, he would be back in about a month. At this time, it would be the beginning of February. He could start to command the slaves to farm and then plant spring wheat for self-sufficiency. At that time, the camp would really have a firm foothold. As the leader of a force, Soren naturally couldn't come and go as freely as before. He took out the blueprints that he had prepared at the beginning. One copy was given to the half-elf first mate, who was responsible for the construction plan of the entire camp. The other copy was given to the one-eyed man, who was responsible for supervising the slaves' work. Finally, Soren came to another place where the slaves were held. He was ready to see the eastern slaves that were transported over. These people were all skilled craftsmen. Bang! Soren pushed the door open. The room where the slaves were held smelled very bad. There was an obvious stench. He waved his hand and signaled the people below to open the door for ventilation. Then he slowly walked in front of the eastern slave craftsmen and said in a deep voice, "Who can speak the common language?" Many of the eastern slaves looked at each other. As a wizard, Soren was unintentionally a failure because he knew too little language. The eastern slaves in front of him didn't seem to know much of the common language. They often used the desert language and eastern dialects. In theory, people who could speak many languages were knowledgeable. After all, this was an era where many commoners couldn't write their own names. In this era, being able to read was a sign of status. One could find a relatively easy job in the city that could support oneself. Even though most of the slaves in front of him were craftsmen, the language they knew was still limited to the east. They didn't know much about the common language here. Simply put, there was a language barrier between the two sides. No one knows the common language? Soren couldn't help but frown. He then asked his subordinates, "Does anyone know the Eastern language? I remember that someone went on the Eastern Ocean route." There was a short moment of silence. Then he saw that among the Eastern slaves, there was a middle-aged man in his 40s who stood up. He looked at Soren with some fear, then lowered his head and said, "Your Excellency, I know the common language." Soren glanced at him and immediately said, "Very good. From today onwards you will be their foreman. According to the customs of the mainland, since you fell into my hands as slaves, you are considered as my personal property. However, I am a very generous and benevolent person. As long as you work hard for me, I will give you the freedom you deserve. From now on, I will mobilize people to make brick kilns for you. Your next task is to make bricks, the more the better. Once you have burned 1,000,000 bricks, I will grant freedom to some of you." Soren paused for a moment. He looked at the middle-aged man who had a surprised expression and said in a deep voice, "Translate these words to them. You will be their foreman from now on. I will allocate a group of people for you. If I don't see satisfactory progress when I come back, your head will be hung on the flagpole outside." The middle-aged man was pleasantly surprised when he heard this. Then it turned into fear and he quickly nodded. These people were all craftsmen with skills. In this world, craftsmen were valuable, so Soren was much more tolerant of them. After waiting for the middle-aged man in front of him to translate, he called a small leader, gave a few instructions and left. Then other slaves began to be mobilized, and a group of capable pirates were in charge of supervising. Perhaps because Soren was very orderly, his minions gradually began to behave. Although there was not much discipline, it was much better than before. Because they were too presumptuous, they were all dealt with. Soren arranged things here and then went to see the indigenous slaves who were captured. During this period of time about 30 people died. The cause of death was not because of escaping, but because of the way the drows controlled the slaves. This was a very complicated process involving criminal law, psychological suggestion, enslavement control, and so on. Some things were really not suitable to be said, but the general effect was still very obvious. That was, the indigenous slaves were now not so resistant to working hard every day in exchange for food. They did not work hard, but they did not slack off because they knew the terrible punishment for slacking off. A day passed quickly. Soren gave a lot of orders and made a lot of arrangements on this day. Anyone who saw the plan, even the pirate leaders, could feel that Soren was not just building an overseas base. However, they did not have any dissatisfaction. On the contrary, they were a little excited. After all, not everyone liked the wandering life of a pirate. With a foundation and a guarantee, at least they could leave something for their children and families in the future. Even if they were alone, they would not always like to live a life of uncertainty. Recently, some people in the camp had been discussing that His Excellency Throat Cutter's arrangements seemed to be preparing to develop the outer islands. If they could really develop here, if they had any injuries in the future, they might be rewarded by His Excellency Throat Cutter. In this way, even if they were old and weak in the future, they would have a foundation to support themselves. Maybe they could even be a small landlord or something. Many pirates were forced to enter this industry. Although there were many vicious and bloodthirsty people among them, there were also many people who longed for a stable life. Soren was quietly changing everything. Perhaps this change was not very obvious, but everything seemed to be in order. One day this change would amaze the whole world. Because a new force was rising. Chapter 289. The next day. Soren was ready to leave the camp and go to the north to invite Gloria. The Northern Witch was the only high-grade spellcaster that they had a good relationship with, and Soren had some unclear feelings for her. No one could tell when it started. Maybe it started when they encountered the believers of the god of hunting, or maybe it slowly developed over time. But one thing was for sure, Gloria, the Northern Witch, had a very high position in Soren's heart because she was one of the few people that Soren cared about. Strictly speaking, Soren was a very cold person. Being able to make a cold person care about her meant a lot of things. Vivian seemed a little sad about Soren's temporary departure, but she was still a child after all. After finding her new toy, she immediately became happy again. Because she had a new gift. It was a very cute cat girl. She was only 7 years old this year, 2 years younger than Vivian, but because of her race she looked about the same age as Vivian. This little cat girl was Vivian's maid. Although she was still clumsy and didn't know how to do anything, the little girl still felt that she could train her into a first-class maid. It was strange. This cat girl, who didn't show any kindness to anyone, even if Soren was close to her, would bare her teeth and pounce. But after meeting Vivian, she was unusually well-behaved, just like a domestic kitten. Maybe it was because they were about the same age and looked similar in size, or maybe it was because of Vivian's amazing charm. Anyway, the cat girl was very obedient after meeting her. She would do whatever she wanted her to do and play whatever role she wanted her to play. The little girl took out all the exquisite dresses that she had collected but had never worn before, and then changed her into them one by one. She even bathed her and dressed her up like a doll. It seemed that with this cat girl, Vivian would be very happy during this time. But what made Soren a little frustrated was that he originally thought that after Vivian tamed this wild cat girl, he could also see how she was different from ordinary people. But he didn't expect that after seeing him approaching, the little cat girl would immediately bare her teeth and pounce on him. Sure enough, different people were treated differently. People with high charisma would be more popular in whatever they did. No wonder so many lazy people chose the sorcerer as their core profession. Vivian had a playmate. Although she was not a normal human but a little beastkin, Soren was happy to see her. After all, the little girl was sometimes quite lonely. In the past, Soren rarely had time to accompany her because he had to survive. And he had no time to accompany her. Now there were countless things, and there was the coming Avatar crisis. It could almost be said that it was more difficult for Soren to rest leisurely with her. So having such a cat girl around the same age by her side should also make the little girl much happier. Yes, Vivian was much happier because of this playmate. This was because she had a playmate. Although she was a cat girl, the little girl still named her Lulu, because she couldn't speak yet. Other than her strange and incomprehensible pronunciation, she could only meow and shout loon loon loo. So her name was Lulu. Lulu was a very playful, obedient and well-behaved cat girl. She was also very cute. After she was cleaned, she looked very beautiful, like a delicate doll. People couldn't help but hug and pinch her. However, Vivian was also a little worried. Because she was a little afraid that Lillian would play with Lulu until she broke. Recently, Lillian had apparently become more interested in this cat girl. Let's hope she doesn't mess around. Soren set off. But he didn't bring too many people with him. He only prepared a warship and secretly controlled the ghost ship. It would probably take nearly a month to go to and from the north because he had to go to Port Tylon and Shipwreck Bay to deal with some things. Soren was different from other pirate kings. He had strong control of the sea and had high requirements for his men. This time, he went to the north to invite Gloria, so he naturally had to arrange the things that needed to be dealt with. After all, no matter how strong his men were, they were still much weaker than Soren's own arrangements. Otherwise, the red-haired female pirate Adele Isabella would have returned by now. It seemed that she had failed. It was indeed difficult for a pirate to successfully persuade a proud wizard to cooperate with a pile of stones. If they were unlucky, it would be difficult to even meet. Sailing was a very boring thing. The first day passed uneventfully. Soren brought his men back along the original route. This situation lasted until the third day, when he saw something interesting in the exclamations of his pirates. Fish tide. Or more technically, it was the fishing season. Many fish here had the habit of migrating. In front of him were some fish that migrated in spring. Soren didn't know most of them, but he saw about 2 meters long fish that looked like hairtails. They had silver scales on their surface and were quite eye-catching in the sea. There were also things that looked like shrimps, which were a little different from the lobsters that Soren saw last time. He didn't know how many rich resources there were in this sea that had not been explored by humans. Look over there. The lookout on the battleship suddenly shouted, and then everyone looked in the direction he was pointing. Sharks. Soren saw a lot of sharks. The fishing season was a harvest season for the Aborigines, and for other creatures in the outer islands, it was also a harvest season. However, the sharkmen that appeared in the distance didn't seem to be fishing, but more like driving the fish in a certain direction. Chapter 290. It was a rather boring 7 days. In fact, this kind of boredom was what others dreamed of because if it was not boring, it meant that they encountered a sea monster. This was definitely a disaster in the boundless sea, and an important reason for blocking the trade routes of the outer islands. It turned out that Soren's initial decision to get close to the sea temple was correct, because with the support of the sea goddess behind him, not only did his warships not have to worry about deep-sea monsters, but even his other fleets did not have to worry about attacks from sea monsters. The only regret was that he had not been able to have an effective contact with the Sharkmen and the Naga Sirens. Naturally, there was no way to talk about deep-sea trade. If the profits of overseas trade were enough to make people take risks, then the profits of deep-sea trade were enough to make people ignore their beliefs. Unfortunately, deep-sea species were quite repulsive to land creatures. The 7-day route was not very long. Soren encountered a storm on the 5th day, but it was not very serious and would not affect their course. About the morning of the 7th day, Soren returned to the south coast, but his first stop was not Port Tylon, but Snake Island. Snake Island was now used as a storage base, with about 200 pirates stationed there for a long time. These pirates were all low-level thugs, and there was a small leader responsible for the security here. The real elites were basically brought to the outer islands by Soren. But this did not mean that the defense of Snake Island was weak. On the contrary, the defense here was better than other places. Because there was a mutated giant tiger shark here. Soren first used the blessing of the sea goddess to control the giant tiger shark, not knowing if it was because it had killed too many people or because it had eaten too many people. Now it was obviously developing in the direction of a mutated sea monster, and because of the control effect of the blessing of the sea goddess, it had a feeling of obedience to Soren. This kind of control was stronger than its previous master, and because of the improvement of its wisdom, it could gradually distinguish between friend and foe. It was mutating into a magical creature. The giant tiger shark was about half the size of the past, and at this rate, it would eventually grow to the size of a warship. At that time, it would probably be able to overturn a warship like a giant octopus. Due to the strange perception of magical creatures and some kind of hidden spiritual connection, when Soren just returned to the waters near Snake Island, the giant tiger shark swam over from other places, and then emerged from the sea to meet him. It swam around the warship and seemed a little happy. Soren stood on the deck and watched the tiger shark swimming near the warship. He had a smile on his face, and after watching for a while he asked his men behind him, "Are there any sheep on the ship?" A pirate behind him turned and trotted to the cabin to ask, and then ran back and said, "Your Excellency. There are also 3 goats, half a deer and some other things." Yes. Soren nodded and said, "Throw all the sheep down." So, 2 strong pirates came up with a sheep each. After they saw Soren nodding, they came to the deck. The 2 pirates looked at the giant tiger shark swimming near the warship with a face full of awe and fear, and then threw the 2 sheep down. The tiger shark had a very powerful blood-tracking ability. After it sensed the smell of blood in the water, it immediately swam over. Then it opened its mouth and swallowed the 2 sheep, and then quietly followed behind the warship. This giant tiger shark was raised freely. In the south coast where fish were abundant, there was no need for Soren to feed it. Feeding it was just to increase the intimacy. The tiger shark followed Soren to the vicinity of Snake Island, and then it gradually dived into the sea and swam towards the outside. It was now equivalent to a sea monster that occupied a part of the sea. It was active in the deep sea near Snake Island. Some time ago, some of his men saw it fighting with a giant octopus. At that time, the pirate leader below also ordered his men to help it. That was why Soren promoted the pirate leader to the steward of Snake Island. Until the giant tiger shark had completely left, the pirate sailors below were still talking about it. Their eyes were filled with awe and pride from time to time. It would not be long before some of them would brag about what they had seen and heard in the taverns of Port Tylon. There was no doubt. Pirates were also a group of people who liked to brag, especially when they drank too much, or when they wanted to attract the attention of a barmaid. The environment of Snake Island had changed a lot. First of all, the area it occupied was much larger. Since it was Soren's transit station and warehouse, of course, it had to have enough space. Snake Island was now the hub of the entire South Sea smuggling trade. Whether it was going to Port Tylon, the city of wealth, or coastal trade to Shipwreck Bay, Snake Island was a place they could not avoid. Smuggling by sea was the biggest source of profit for the South Coast. Because there were too many checkpoints in land trade, there were often guards and nobles who exploited the profits. Therefore, shipping directly by sea could save a lot of money and avoid most of the taxes. This business was like selling illegal salt. No matter what, there was a way to survive. As soon as Soren arrived at Snake Island, the pirate leader in charge immediately came to greet him. Soren did not remember the name of this man at all, but he remembered his physical characteristics very clearly. Chapter 291. Where's the goods from the east? Soren turned around and asked the people around him. Immediately, someone led him to the back. Soon, a pile of carefully placed goods appeared in front of him. Without even looking, one could tell that it was filled with porcelain. It was a very precious commodity. On the continent, exquisite porcelain was sometimes more popular than silver. At the same time, because porcelain was easily broken, it was easy to have accidents during transportation. Therefore, the price of exquisite porcelain had always been high. Although there were some porcelain crafts on the continent, only porcelain from the East was the best. Only authentic porcelain from the East could be sold at a relatively high price. It was just like how wine tasters like to pursue the origin of the wine. Why are there so many broken? Soren glanced at it and frowned. He said in a deep voice, "Almost all the boxes here are broken." Hearing Soren's words, the pirate leader behind him immediately broke out in cold sweat. He braced himself and said, "The idiot below was careless and fell when he was transporting it. I've already hung him up and gave him 20 lashes. If you're not satisfied, I'll punish them later." "Forget it." Soren waved his hand and said slowly, "Since they've already been punished, forget it." He looked at the porcelain in front of him and then turned to the box next to it containing spices, tea leaves, and silk. The goods from the East were quite valuable. He came here not only to sell them, but also to bring some gifts for Gloria. In the past, she helped Soren and Vivian a lot. In the past, he didn't have the ability to express his gratitude to her. However, Soren was now one of the pirate kings of the South Coast. This time, he invited her to go overseas empty-handed. Courtesy demands reciprocity. In essence, Soren still had a lot of traditions from the past. Gloria probably wouldn't need the other gifts, but the spices, tea leaves, and silk from the East were definitely useful to her. This was because wizards like spices and tea leaves. Many things that had the effect of calming one's mind were helpful for wizards to learn and understand spells. As for silk, it was needless to say. In this era where the overall level of civilization was close to the Middle Ages, silk was something that most women couldn't refuse. "Take all of these and transport them out." Soren glanced at them and picked out the best ones. Then he ordered his men to move them out. This batch of goods was quite high-end. Soren opened the 2 boxes and looked through them. He found a mermaid symbol in the corner of the box. Of course, this was not a mermaid. In fact, it looked more like a mermaid from the East. This thing was called a mermaid in the East. It was completely different from the fishman in the West. This symbol represented a very powerful force in the Eastern world. It controlled nearly 60% of the trade in the Eastern world. Whether it was goods transported through the desert on land or by sea, most of them had to be purchased from the cities under their control. This organization was quite strange. Soren had interacted with them before, and there were many experts among them. In addition, these Easterners were not afraid of the drows at all. They were also one of the few humans who would trade directly with the underground drows, even if this kind of trade was relatively hidden and not many. Soren quickly picked out the gift. He didn't stay on Snake Island for long. After preparing the gift for Gloria, Soren took his men to Port Tylon. Now that he was back, he had to meet the Naga Siren priest. Otherwise she might be dissatisfied. If he didn't come to see her, she might think that Soren was arrogant. After all, she was the presiding priest of the South Coast. In Port Tylon and the cities close to the mainland, the influence of the Naga Siren priest was still very strong. Soren still needed the power of the Sea Temple. It didn't take too much time to go to Port Tylon. In the afternoon, Soren arrived at Port Tylon with his men. The approach of the battleship did not alarm too many people, but there were still some leaders of the Chamber of Commerce who learned of Soren's return. Some of them were ready to come and meet him, just like how Soren wanted to meet the Naga Siren priest. As soon as Soren arrived at the port of Port Tylon, he ordered others to send his gift to the Sea Temple. Then he was ready to stay here for one night, and then set off for Shipwreck Bay. When it was time to send a gift, he still had to send one. Even if Soren forced the Naga Siren priest to give in and bow her head at the beginning, now that things were over, if there was a chance to ease the relationship, he still had to win her over a little. If Soren wanted to gain a foothold on the south coast, he must hold on to the golden thigh of the sea goddess. As long as he held on to the golden thigh of the sea goddess, even if it was a big thing, the Sea Temple would share some of the pressure for him. Soren was willing to serve the sea goddess. Wasn't it because he wanted to enjoy the shade under a big tree? Of course. It was not enough to just hold on to a big tree. Soren's ultimate goal was to make himself a big tree. As soon as the pirate who sent the gift left, the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Port Tylon came over and brought gifts one by one. These guys had a lot of eyes and ears. Pirates always liked to leak information, so it was not surprising that they knew about Soren's return. For the arrival of these guys, Soren knew clearly in his heart, because what they wanted was nothing more than the black market smuggling trade and a new route to the outer islands. These things could not be given to them. The reason why Soren did not attack merchant ships and was able to support so many of his men was because he had a firm grasp on the smuggling trade. The profit in it was quite amazing. Soren now had more than 2,000 pirates and Chamber of Commerce sailors under his command. These people ate and drank gold and silver from the smuggling trade. The protection fee at sea was not enough to support these people. As for the other route to the outer islands, Soren could not share it with them. In the future, this would be a way to make money. A meaningless greeting. Soren had a smile on his face as he dealt with people from all walks of life. He accepted all the gifts that were sent over, but he did not reply to any of them who wanted to inquire about overseas trade routes, or to probe into smuggling trade and so on. This attitude made many people helpless. Many people could only leave the gifts and leave with disappointment. Time passed like this for a quarter of an hour. When Soren finished dealing with the heads of these Chamber of Commerce, suddenly a strange figure appeared behind him. Then a cold light appeared, and a strange knife pierced through his back and directly hit Soren's heart. Blood splattered out of the wound. Soren's figure stiffened for a moment, and then his face showed a trace of pain. The knife pierced his heart. Chapter 292. No one knew when the assassin appeared. Even Soren didn't notice it. The enemy's strength was a little beyond his estimation. It wasn't until the moment before the enemy stabbed him that Soren realized that someone had ambushed him. His powerful dodging ability and amazing physical fitness made him want to avoid the attack from behind, but it was too late. Because he didn't have the ability, danger sense, the moment he was ready to dodge, the enemy had already stabbed him in the back. The tip of the sword pierced his back and it was impossible to dodge. At that moment, countless thoughts flashed through Soren's mind, but in the end, the will to survive dominated his body. When the enemy stabbed him in the back, he instantly activated Stone Skin, but the tip of the sword still pierced through his muscles and pierced his heart. At that moment, Soren could only activate Slaughter Transformation at the same time. Then, in the next moment, his body began to undergo a shocking change. His racing heartbeat squeezed out his blood, and in less than a millisecond his entire body's quality was greatly improved. Then he entered the Son of Slaughter form. The tip of the sword pierced his heart. Soren's body stiffened for a moment. The feeling of his heart being pierced was so painful that it made him lose some of his strength. However, the additional ability of the Son of Slaughter form had been activated. The person who assassinated Soren seemed to be a legendary assassin, because only a legendary assassin could get close to Soren without him noticing. However, as an assassin, the enemy's strength didn't seem to be high. The tip of the sword that should have pierced through Soren's heart was stuck after it pierced his heart under the effect of stone skin and slaughter transformation. His strength was exhausted. Soren's muscles clamped the enemy, and then when the enemy was about to twist the sword and crush his heart, a cold light appeared in the palm of Soren's hand. Then the legendary curved sword, Icing Death, appeared in his hand and directly slashed at the enemy's throat. This was a fierce counterattack. Obviously, the legendary assassin who tried to assassinate Soren hesitated for a moment. In his mind, Soren was almost a dead target, so he certainly didn't want to die together with Soren. So the enemy took 3 steps back, pulled out his dagger and dodged Soren's attack at the same time. Tsk tisk. The assassin let out a mocking exclamation. From the outside, he looked like an ordinary sailor, but Soren knew that this was not the enemy's true face. In front of him was an assassin who was proficient in disguise. This was an uncommon type of basic skill. Compared to the disguise that could be removed by magic, this kind of disguise that relied on craftsmanship was more exquisite. The legendary assassin stared at Soren in front of him, licked his lips and said, "You're still alive after being stabbed in the heart. You really have a tenacious life force. No wonder that person was willing to pay me a high price to kill you. But how long can you last with this kind of injury?" The assassin's eyes were cold and full of murderous intent. He was also looking for Soren's weakness. This was because he felt a sense of danger when he transformed into the slaughterer. Soren's pupils turned blood red. Blood flowed out of his back, but the muscles he controlled temporarily stopped the bleeding. Soren would not die from excessive blood loss in a short period of time. He was now like the Knoll Hunter who was successfully assassinated by Soren. At that time, Soren also stabbed the Knoll Hunter's heart, but because the Knoll Hunter's vitality was too tenacious and his constitution was more than 20 points, he did not die immediately. He held on for a while before dying from excessive blood loss. A row of blood-red data appeared. "You're under attack. You've been stabbed in the back by the enemy. You've received 126 piercing damage. You've received 21 shadow damage. You've been stabbed in the heart. You've triggered the test of death. You've successfully passed the test of death. You've entered a heavily injured state. You've entered a heavily bleeding state. Your remaining vitality will be drained quickly." A backstab. Even with Soren's extraordinary constitution of 22 points, plus the 2 points bonus from the Slaughterer transformation, and the defensive effect of the Stone Skin spell, he still could not reduce the enemy's damage by much. This stab directly entered a heavily injured state. Even if he temporarily passed the test of death, being stabbed in the heart meant that he would quickly enter a near-death state and eventually die. "I can't die here." This was the only thought in Soren's mind. Then, the willpower that he had been training for a long time began to show its effect. Soren suppressed the pain in his body, and also suppressed the fear of death. His brain worked quickly in an instant, and in a short moment he found a chance for himself to survive. At the same time he also found a chance to counterattack. The Sea Temple. As long as he could escape to the Sea Temple, the Naga Siren priest could heal his injury. Although this kind of fatal injury was very scary, as long as Soren could be saved from the jaws of death. The injury to the heart was completely healed, and the bleeding injury was nothing at all. As long as Soren escaped to the Sea Temple, even if his heart was destroyed, he would not die because greater restoration could even regenerate the heart. Now the Naga Siren priest would definitely not sit back and watch him die. The two sides were currently on the same front. If there was no Soren as the knife in her hand, the Naga Siren priest would eventually be alone, and her life would definitely not be better than now. Escape. He must escape from there. Only a high-grade priest could heal his fatal injury. But where would he get the chance to escape? How could the enemy in front of him let him escape? He had such a heavy injury on his body. The chance of escaping from the enemy's hands was quite low. Not to mention that there was still a long way to go from here to the Sea Temple. Fear. Instant cast. Summon Shadow. Evade sight. Shadow jump. Soren launched several abilities in a row in an instant. First, It was an instant cast of fear brought by a weak divinity, then he summoned a shadow, and then his whole person disappeared into the shadow. But this time, Soren was not trying to fight back against the enemy, but to escape from the enemy's attack. His figure appeared from a shadow in the distance, and then he instantly drank a bottle of expensive healing potion and fled in the direction of the sea temple. The Naga Siren priest had given him a high-grade healing potion, which could temporarily prolong Soren's death. Chapter 293. You want to run? A cold light appeared in the eyes of the legendary assassin. His figure suddenly jumped back into the shadows, but he did not enter stealth. Instead, his body directly blended into the shadows, then disappeared in the next moment, and then appeared about 30 meters ahead. This strange assassin's silhouette appeared in the shadows, but he did not stay in the same place for too long. In just a moment he disappeared again and then appeared in the shadows very close to Soren. Shadow Leap. This was a special ability that legendary rogues could master. It was similar to the effect of Shadow Leap, but they did not need to enter stealth. As long as they were in the shadows, legendary rogues could perform space jumps across planes. The effect was similar to the wizard's blink spell. This special ability belonged to the category of supernatural ability. It had a certain distance of space jumps, but there was no limit to the number of times it could be used. Under normal circumstances, legendary rogues could perform a shadow leap of up to 100 meters a day. This supernatural ability was similar to the short-distance blink spell. It could be divided into 10 meters and then used 10 times. And there was no need to enter stealth as long as the body was in the shadows. Until now. Soren's pirates finally reacted, but they were of no use in this legendary battle. By the time they were ready to rush over to help Soren, the two of them had already used their supernatural abilities to rush hundreds of meters away. The injury on Soren's back was very serious. The violent movement accelerated his blood loss. Even if he had a strong regenerative ability, he could not regenerate his heart. At this moment, a stream of blood gushed out from his back, almost dyeing his whole back red. The enemy was still gradually closing the distance. Perhaps because of the approaching death, Soren's perception ability was also pushed to the limit. He could feel that the enemy was just a dozen meters behind him, and was still catching up with him little by little. Because the enemy seemed to have some legendary item in his hand that could buff him in an instant, similar to instant escape and haste. In this case, Soren's chances of escaping were quite low, so he made a decision in an instant and rushed directly to the place where there were many people in the distance. Thump thump. After Soren's figure passed by, the crowd was in chaos for a moment, and then people and horses were thrown off their feet. The carriage in the middle of the road suddenly seemed to have gone mad, and the horses pulling the carriage neighed and rushed forward. There was a knife mark on the horse's buttocks. When Soren passed through the horse, he made a cut with his knife. Then the whole street was in chaos. Several people were sent flying by the galloping horses. No one knew if they were dead or alive after they landed on the ground, but the panicked crowd had achieved the effect Soren wanted. Soren's figure was temporarily blocked by the rushing carriages and the fleeing crowd. The enemy was slightly slower in catching up to him. Do you think you can escape like this? The eerie figure shuttled through the crowd, avoiding most of the things that were in his way. Occasionally there would be pedestrians blocking his path. A cold light would appear in his palm, and then a corpse would be left behind. Soren's injuries were too severe. Wherever he walked there would be blood stains. The enemies behind him could use this to lock onto his position, even if they had temporarily put some distance between them. Bang! Soren's figure rushed into a narrow alleyway. In just a breath's time, another eerie figure appeared and rushed into the alleyway as well. He had a playful expression on his face, like a cat trying to catch a mouse. He seemed to enjoy Soren's final struggle because he was certain that Soren would not be able to escape from his grasp. However, when he rushed into the alleyway, what he saw was not Soren's back. Instead, he saw a pair of eyes filled with murderous intent, as if they were about to strike back at him. Swoosh! When the enemy behind Soren rushed into the alleyway, a faint cold light suddenly appeared, and the enemy's figure froze for a moment. Blow dart +3. A steel needle that was almost difficult to catch with the naked eye flew out. Before the legendary assassin in front of him could react, he was hit on the spot by Soren's sudden attack. Life and death were decided in this moment. The legendary tier assassin only felt a slight pain in his body, and then he could no longer feel anything. Even though he knew that he had fallen into Soren's trap, he did not care at all. He was still prepared to kill Soren first. In his opinion, a steel needle was not enough to kill him. However, he had only taken a few steps when his body began to feel that something was wrong. His speed had obviously slowed down and his body was quite stiff when he moved. In the end, he almost staggered and fell to the ground. Damn it. The legendary tier assassin's face showed a trace of despair and panic because he found that his body was getting stiffer and stiffer. What the hell is this? It's actually so powerful. He was hit. Soren's figure turned around in an instant, and then a cold light appeared in his palm, directly striking the enemy in front of him. As a former legendary thief, Soren knew the weaknesses of rogues too well. Although rogues had all kinds of mysterious means and various special skills, they were still one thing that could not be changed. One thing that could never be changed was that they did not have as many terrible spells as wizards, and they did not have as strong resistance as warriors. Even now that Soren had accumulated 22 constitution, it was difficult for him to compare with a warrior of the same level in terms of fortitude. Therefore, if even he could not pass that +3 fortitude skill, the enemy in front of him would at most have less than a 50% chance of passing the +3 fortitude skill. Half and half. Life and death depended on whether the enemy's constitution was strong enough. In the past, when many quasi-legendary tier and legendary tier professions were exploring the outer islands, they failed miserably because of these blow darts. From the beginning, Soren planned to fight back. He wanted to bet on whether he could use the blow darts to knock down the enemy in front of him. Plop. The legendary tier assassin in front of Soren suddenly stiffened and almost fell to the ground. Such an opportunity was absolutely impossible for Soren to miss, so when the enemy in front of him lost his balance, the curved sword in his hand also drew a cold light. Sword form, beheading. Blood spurted out and a head fell to the ground, its eyes wide open. Soren's figure gasped for breath for a moment, then shook slightly as if he was a little unstable. Chapter 294. He didn't care about the corpse on the ground. Soren staggered out of the alley without looking at the legendary loot on the corpse. His vision was a little blurry and everything he saw seemed to be shaking. There seemed to be some data flashing in front of his eyes, but due to excessive blood loss, his brain began to become unclear. Soren felt more and more difficult to breathe, and the strength in his body was gradually draining away. If it weren't for a strong will supporting his body, he would have fallen down long ago. A row of data appeared, health points reduced to less than 90%. You've entered a state of near death. In a state of continuous bleeding. You will die in 30 seconds. You passed the test of death in a state of near death. You've acquired part of the special ability, Death's Toughness. Soren's vision became more and more blurry. His vitality was gradually draining away, but he was not willing to die like this. Because he couldn't die yet, and he shouldn't die in the hands of such an enemy. In the Avatar Crisis there were many legends and gods. He had experienced so many life and death killings along the way. He had even fought with the great divine power twice. Now, how could he be so easily killed by a legendary professional? He had already reached a higher level than before. As long as he was given a little time, Soren believed that he could be countless times stronger than he was at his peak in the past. Piercing his heart was depriving him of his vitality. Even the weak divinity couldn't heal Soren's injury, because this kind of injury was fatal for many high-grade demons. Unless the divinity was strong enough to ignore the body, the heart was still a fatal weakness of flesh and blood. Soren's vitality was on the verge of death. His strength was getting weaker and weaker, and his spirit was getting more and more tired. It seemed that he could fall down at any time. But he was still moving forward slowly. Everything he had experienced in the past, his will that was tempered by walking barefoot for thousands of miles, and his worry and reluctance for Vivian made him not fall down easily. Then he heard a person's voice. As if the last of his potential had been squeezed out, Soren suddenly opened his eyes. His pupils were glowing with a blood-red light, and the person who appeared in front of him seemed to be a woman. Soren could no longer see the man's face clearly, but he could feel the man's nervousness. Anyone would be shocked to see a man covered in blood walking out of an alley. The woman seemed to be an Amazon warrior. When she saw Soren, she was very alert and was ready to pull out her weapon. But at this time, Soren suddenly sped up and rushed toward her. Sorry. Soren seemed to have exhausted the last of his strength. After squeezing out all his potential, he gently said sorry, then pointed his finger at the Amazon woman who happened to appear nearby. Vampiric touch. As Soren's finger touched the woman's body, a strong vitality was transferred from the Amazon woman's body to Soren's body. The wound on his back seemed to have healed a lot, and even the pierced heart seemed to have healed a little. This was the effect of spell control. Soren was trying his best to control the vitality absorbed by the spell to transfer to the position of his heart, using it to heal the vital part of his heart that was pierced by the enemy. Soren's breathing gradually became stronger, and everything in front of him became clearer. A trace of blood even appeared on his originally pale face. He was close to death, but because of this spell he was forcibly pulled back to a seriously injured state. Even his pierced heart was still bleeding. Vampiric Touch, Minor Divinity. When activating this talent, you can condense negative energy to erode the enemy's vitality and temporarily transfer it to yourself. After activating this ability, any enemy directly touched by you will lose Divinity plus Spell Power, *3 HP that you have. A maximum of 60 HP will be absorbed. These HP will be transferred to your body and heal your injuries. If the amount of HP exceeds your HP, the HP will be retained for 1 hour, increasing your maximum HP. The effect of this spell cannot be stacked. The target may die directly because of the exhaustion of vitality. This ability will increase with the level of divinity. Once per day. Bang! A cold corpse fell to the ground. As Soren's injuries gradually healed, the Amazon woman in front of him became weaker and weaker. Finally, her whole face seemed to have lost its luster, and her skin became pale and dim. Finally, she completely stopped breathing. Vampiric Touch was a necromancy spell, and it was also one of the few spells that wizards could use to heal themselves. This spell could kill the enemy. If the vitality absorbed exceeded the limit of the enemy, then the target would be completely sucked dry and die. Soren had strengthened his divinity to minor divinity. With his current divinity, casting this spell could almost achieve the maximum effect, and the Amazon woman in front of him didn't seem to have more than 60 HP. So she died. Soren said sorry before reaching out to touch her because he knew that it was difficult for people who had their vitality absorbed by him to survive. But he didn't regret it. Although this seemed to be the first time he took away an irrelevant life in order to let himself live. There was no time to think about it. The wound in Soren's heart had not completely healed. As long as it didn't heal, his vitality would continue to drain. Soren didn't look at the corpse on the ground and directly rushed in the direction of the Sea Temple. There was still time. After using the spell Vampiric Touch to drain the woman's vitality, Soren could at least hold on for a while. I can't die. I can't die. I can't die here. There was only one thought left in Soren's mind, that was, he couldn't die so easily because the Avatar crisis hadn't come yet, and Vivian's fate hadn't changed. If he died here, it would be difficult for the little girl to survive in the cruel battle. The obsession to live was so strong. It was so strong that Soren had nightmares all night. When he opened his eyes the next day, he found himself naked in a pool of blue sea water. In front of him was the Naga Siren priest who closed her eyes. When she noticed that Soren had woken up, she slowly opened her eyes, then raised her hand and threw a golden coin to him and said in a deep voice, "You owe me a favor. The other things on the assassin's body are my rewards. This gold coin seems to be a bit special. Only when it is close to you will there be a faint magic aura. Maybe it will be more useful for you." Chapter 295. Snap. Soren reached out and caught the gold coin. He didn't know if it was his illusion, but he seemed to feel a slight electric current. Then it seemed that there was nothing, and the gold coin in his hand became almost the same weight as the other kindlers. Soren stood up in the blue pool. He looked at his naked body, then reached out and stroked his back. He could feel the new muscles where his heart was. Without the countless guilds in the past, there were fewer and fewer high-grade priests that could be trained. In the whole South Coast area, the only high-grade priest that Soren knew was the Naga Siren priest in front of him. He didn't know what to do during the Avatar crisis. Without a high-grade priest, the casualties would be terrible. If it was in the past, he wouldn't be so embarrassed with such an injury. The priest in the team would immediately cast a restoration spell and he would be able to fight again. But now, he was forced to use Vampiric Touch to extend his life, and finally he was lucky enough to reach the Sea Temple. In the past, even when Soren was alone, he could meet some priests that were trained in other guilds from time to time. After all, priests were the core of the lineup and they were absolutely indispensable. In this way, if he was injured, he could spend more money to save him. But now he couldn't even find a priest. It was quite difficult to meet a second-grade priest outside. "I owe you a favor." Soren stood up slowly. His things were placed on the side of the hall, and it seemed that no one had touched them. However, the legendary assassin's things seemed to have been taken away by the Naga Siren priest. Soren couldn't say anything about it. After all, it was her restoration spell that saved his life. Soren was actually feeling very bad now. For the first time, he urgently found that he needed to find a priest who could cast high-grade divine spells as a teammate. Because if he didn't have such a priest by his side, it was almost impossible for him not to be injured if he encountered a powerful enemy. If he was still injured like today, even if he relied on fortitude to resist the test of death, he would still die in the hands of the enemy in the end. This time against a legendary enemy. Soren had relied entirely on luck. He had relied on the fact that the blow darts of the Aborigines had a very high degree of immunity. In the past, it had also caused some legendary professions to fail miserably. Only then did he seize the opportunity to kill the enemy. It could be said that if it weren't for the blow dart +3, Soren's chances of survival would have been quite low. After all, the enemy was a pure legendary level rogue. The disadvantages of having a part-time job were now apparent. Soren was a level 10 rogue, but he didn't even notice when the enemy had sneaked up behind him. This was the difference between pure classes and subclasses. Subclasses didn't have any obvious shortcomings, but they also couldn't develop to the limit in a certain field. Once they encountered a pure class enemy, they would be left far behind. Soren's rogue level was only half of the opponent's, and his wizard level was not enough to play a supporting role, which was why he was so passive this time. Soren got up and put on his clothes, then bowed slightly to the priest in front of the hall before leaving. Then he left the sea temple. After Soren's figure had completely left, another hazy figure appeared. It seemed to be some kind of strange sea creature. "Your Excellency." The hazy sea creature looked out of the hall and said in a hoarse voice, "Is this the new pirate king who killed the Swamp King? Didn't he make things difficult for you some time ago? Why don't you take the opportunity to kill him? It's just right to control his pirates so our power will be strengthened." The Naga Siren priest frowned, then looked at the other party coldly and said slowly, "The real value is him, not the group of trash under him. Besides, if he dies, who will help me deal with Asrid? You." Speaking of this, the Naga Siren priest's face showed a hint of sarcasm and said, "Go back. You are all good at fighting for power, but none of you really dare to fight with Asrid. In my opinion, only he can kill that damn Asrid. Pirate King Asrid. At least before getting rid of this thorn, she couldn't let Soren die like this." Moreover, on the corpse of the legendary assassin, the Naga Siren priest also saw a letter of entrustment. The contents of the letter were needless to say. After reading it, the Naga Siren priest was mad. She couldn't let Soren die like this. At the same time, she strengthened her determination to support Soren. However, this letter couldn't be shown to Soren yet. It was a very useful tool. When she was ready to kill Asrid in the future, the Naga Siren priest believed that as long as she showed this assassination letter to Soren, he would never let go of Asrid. Soren left the sea temple. Such a life and death experience made the pressure in his heart much stronger. He was also deeply aware of his own lack of strength. As time went on, the chances of legendary professions appearing would become higher and higher. Now there were already legendary assassins to assassinate him. Would the chance of meeting other legendary professions in the future be far? Legendary professions were a ticket. Without this ticket, he would not be qualified to control his own destiny in the future. Soren felt that he had too many things to do, but there was not enough time at all. It seemed that after dealing with the recent matters and laying the foundation of the base in the Outer Islands, it was necessary for him to go to the Underdark. This was the place Soren was most familiar with. It should also be the easiest place to reach the legendary level in the material plane. He had to go and meet those drows again. Because only in the dangerous Underdark, there were so many monsters that Soren could harvest enough slaughter EXP to reach the legendary level as soon as possible. Until Soren returned to his warship. He had time to check the data that appeared. Killing the legendary assassin gave him more than 27,000 slaughter EXP. Sure enough, it was a legendary enemy. The slaughter EXP was much higher than other enemies. Soren now accumulated about 5,000 slaughter EXP to level up as a wizard. Legendary was a watershed. Basically, killing a legendary creature would give more than 10 or 20,000 slaughter EXP. In the entire material plane, if there was a place where legendary creatures gathered the most, then the Underdark would definitely be at the top. Because there were beholders, mind flayers, drows, and all kinds of quite dangerous creatures. Because of Soren's understanding of the Underdark, it was slightly easier for him to deal with these creatures than with legendary professions. The warship soon set sail. Although Soren had just walked between life and death, he still calmly ordered to move toward Shipwreck Bay, as if the assassination yesterday did not happen at all. As for what he was thinking deep in his heart, perhaps only he knew. Chapter 296. The Frost Kingdom, Arendelle. Princess Anna's pretty figure stood at the top of the castle, looking down at the city in front of her. At this moment the temperature had begun to warm up, and the ice and snow were showing signs of melting. Arendelle was still as lively as before, but there was a tense and depressing atmosphere spreading in the palace. This was something that had never happened before, but now the whole castle was heavily guarded. Because Princess Royal had left. If Princess Royal was still in Arendelle, it wouldn't matter even if there were no guards in the entire palace. But now that Princess Royal had left, the security of the palace needed guards to protect it. In fact, no one thought that Princess Royal would leave so suddenly. Even Princess Anna didn't think that her sister would disappear without a trace after giving her a few simple words. No one knew where she went. Maybe she was no longer in the current world, but somewhere they didn't know. My sister has been away for 3 days. Princess Anna looked at the harbor in the distance, turned to look at the captain behind her and whispered, "I don't know where my sister went, and why she left in such a hurry this time." The captain behind her didn't answer but whispered, "Her Majesty the Queen must have left for something important. Your Royal Highness doesn't have to worry too much. After all, there are very few people in this world who can threaten Her Majesty the Queen." Princess Anna nodded gently and said slowly, "I know. I just miss my sister a little. I used to think that the person I missed the most was him, but after my sister left, I realized that the person I cared about the most in my heart was still my sister. If she was there, I would feel very relaxed, as if I didn't care about anything. No matter what I did wrong, my sister would help me deal with it. But now that she suddenly left, a lot of things are suffocating me. I'm worried that I'll do something wrong and mess up Arendelle." The captain glanced at her and said softly, "Princess Anna has been doing very well. Ta-ta-ta." Just as she finished speaking, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside, and then a panting voice said, "Not good, Your Royal Highness. The pirates in Iceland seem to be making some strange movements. The fleets of the southern islands also seem to be up to no good. They seem to be colluding with each other and are approaching our waters." Patter. It sounded like something had fallen to the ground and broken. Then there was a series of hurried footsteps. Soon, several fully armored generals entered the palace. About 15 minutes later, the palace wizards of Arendelle also gathered. The ice witches all came to the palace hall and seemed to be arguing about something. The guards outside would eavesdrop from time to time. Although he didn't understand a lot of things and didn't hear the complete story, he felt that a war was about to break out in Arendelle. It had been 20 years. Ever since Princess Royal was born, Arendelle had never been involved in a war. Now that Princess Royal had just left, the dark clouds of war were approaching. This caused people to feel a trace of unease. Soren stood on the deck and stared at the sea. After a while he took out a gold coin from his pocket and played with it. This gold coin was about the same weight as an ordinary kindler, but the pattern on it was different. This was because the pattern on it was not the goddess of wealth, but the oldest goddess of luck. As for the mysterious runes on the back of the gold coin, Soren didn't recognize them at all. As a wizard he was too unprofessional. A lot of things were half-baked and he didn't have enough time to learn them. But Soren wasn't completely out of ideas. He actually had a simpler way to unlock the secret of this gold coin, but the cost was slightly higher. Pay 7,000 slaughter EXP. Soren actually knew from the beginning that this gold coin seemed to have some kind of sealing power, but he didn't want to give up so much slaughter EXP. But after thinking about it carefully, he decided to pay the slaughter EXP because this should be a legendary special item. When Soren first touched it he felt an electric current. He didn't know if it had anything to do with the blessing of the goddess of misfortune on him. After all, the goddess of luck and the goddess of misfortune appeared from the corpse of the goddess of luck. A faint light appeared. The gold coin in Soren's palm seemed to have a layer of fog lifted, emitting a strange golden light, and then gradually calming down. Item type: Lucky Gold Coin number 3, Item Grade. Grade 3 Legendary Item. Item Description: This is a very special lucky gold coin. It is said that it was originally created by the goddess of luck. It carries the blessing of the goddess of luck and can bring good luck to the owner. There are a total of 12 of these gold coins. It is said that after collecting all 12 gold coins, an even more amazing secret can be found. But it seems that no one has collected all of these lucky gold coins so far. Only 1 or 2 lucky gold coins would appear occasionally, and in the end they would be obtained by other epic heroes. It seems that these lucky gold coins have a special connection with the legendary Card of Fate. The legendary Great Arcanists seem to have researched the mysterious field of luck as well. Requirements: none. Special effect: Hero's Luck. When holding this gold coin, any owner will receive the ability Hero's Luck. When triggering any test, whether it's attack, dodge, hit, immunity, negotiation, or any other field, the owner of the lucky gold coin will permanently receive 1 point of luck bonus. Note: legend has it that the goddess of luck and the goddess of misfortune are also looking for these gold coins. Give them to the priests of the two goddesses first and you can receive their rewards. Lucky gold coin. This was the data that Soren identified after unsealing it. It seemed to be a legendary item that couldn't increase combat power too much, but it seemed to be quite useful. In the simplest way, this lucky gold coin could provide a special effect of luck +1. This kind of luck bonus could be used in any field, whether it was attack, dodge, immunity, etc. It could give an additional 1 point of luck bonus. It was possible that an enemy that couldn't be hit in battle would suddenly be hit because of a little bit of luck, and an attack that couldn't be avoided would suddenly be dodged by falling down. Who knew about this thing called luck? From a personal point of view, Soren felt that it should be very useful. But he didn't know if the effect of this lucky gold coin could be stacked because according to the description, there were a total of 12 lucky gold coins. If the effect of this lucky gold coin could be stacked, then after all of them were collected, there would be an additional 12 points of luck bonus. This was a rather frightening thing. It could be said that he was a born protagonist with good luck. When he went out and picked up money, he could do whatever he wanted and the enemy would coincidentally bump into him. It seemed that since ancient times, only the gods who were in charge of luck could increase someone's luck to such a degree, right? According to the past data conversion, 2 points of strength can provide 1 point of attack bonus, 2 points of agility can provide 1 point of evasion bonus, and 2 points of physique can provide 1 point of tenacity bonus. According to this calculation, all judgments can get 1 point of luck bonus, and the real effect of the conversion is quite amazing. Strength, agility, physique, perception, intelligence, charm. These 6 attributes all affected the judgment effect. If converted in this way, it was equivalent to getting 12 attribute points of judgment bonus as a reward. The effect was amazing when he thought about it carefully. Soren played with the lucky gold coin in his hand and put it away. It seemed that both the goddess of fortune and the goddess of misfortune wanted this thing. He didn't know what the hidden secret was. The next day, Soren came to Shipwreck Bay. There were not as many things here as in Port Tylon. He came mainly for the slave trade. There were too many indigenous slaves in the outer islands. These indigenous people were wild and untamed and did not know how to farm. If they wanted to develop and grow, the slaves on the mainland would be more useful because most of the slaves on the mainland knew how to do deep farming. In other words, fine farming. Recently, the situation on the mainland had become more and more chaotic. Many nobles took advantage of the situation and annexed the land, turning many civilians who originally owned land into the proletariat. Some of them were directly reduced to slaves. Now the slave market on the south coast was quite popular, and there were people selling themselves as slaves almost every day. In addition, the price of food seemed to have risen by nearly 50%. Many people smelled something wrong. They were either desperately buying food or stopping selling food and hoarding goods. This kind of basic food had risen by half, and the impact on the lower class of the poor was even greater. Especially now, when there was a shortage of manpower. Soren kept these changes in mind, but he didn't care about the food problem at all. He had long known that the closer it was to the period of turmoil, the higher the price of food would be, so he bought a lot of food supplies in advance. The buyers behind the scenes of the bulk food trade in Port Tylon were all Soren's men. At present, the food he had hoarded was enough to support him for a long time. After explaining the slave trade, Soren continued to go to the north along the sea route. However, what made him quite surprised and a little dumbfounded was that because he had brought a lot of gifts to Gloria in the north this time, and because of the assassination attempt by the legendary assassin, he was very careful not to show his flag this time. Then he was robbed. The ones who wanted to rob them were the northern pirates, a group of fierce pirates without much organization. The most powerful pirates in the north were in Iceland. These pirates that Soren encountered were the kind that was small because the core of the northern sea trade route was in Arendelle. That was the real rich route. Chapter 297. Northerners. This was a very interesting regional race. Their physical characteristics were a bit like the Siberian race, with a relatively tall physique and quite exuberant hair. Most of the northern men were brave and warlike. Because of the cold climate, they needed strong alcohol to warm their blood for a long time. The way of thinking of the Northerners was also slightly characteristic of a fighting nation. The women in the north had fair skin and delicate facial features. If the skin was more delicate, it was easy to become a beauty, similar to the women in the Crimea. Gloria was a typical northern beauty. And she was the most beautiful one. Therefore, in a place like the north you would often see some ridiculous things. Even the pirates here were a little brainless. Many of them were famous for their stubbornness. They were a group of people who were not easy to deal with. For example, in the pirate army that besieged Soren on Snake Island, there was a pirate warship from the north. When the others saw that the situation was not good, they all surrendered. Only they fought hard and escaped with casualties. Because of this strange temperament, the northern pirates were almost the weakest group of pirates. The reason was very simple. They were not convinced by each other. There were almost no strong pirate forces on the entire north coast. They were all scattered into small groups of northern pirates. Because the trade on the north coast was mainly concentrated in the Arendelle area, and Arendelle had a very strong navy, it was often seen that northern pirates crossed the border to make a living in other waters. Although their overall strength was relatively weak, the individual strength of the northern pirates was generally higher than that of pirates in other places. The ones who robbed Soren were relatively ordinary northern pirates. However, they had a good dragonhead warship. This was the habit of the Vrykle people in Iceland. They liked to install a dragon head on their warships, and this habit was inherited by the northern pirates to show their strength. The Vrykle people were the only pirate group capable of unifying the north coast. Unfortunately, they were quite xenophobic. Because of the belief of the war spirit totem, even the other races in the north were excluded by them. They were also the only pirate group who dared to attack Arendelle's route. No one knew why the Princess Royal did not destroy them. The sound of ghosts wailing and wolves howling came from the front. As soon as Soren saw the northern pirates' warship, one of the captains immediately ran over to ask for his orders. He looked at the northern pirates' warship in the distance and said, "Bait them." This time, Soren had brought quite a number of elites with him. These were all veterans of naval battles. After hearing Soren's orders, they immediately understood his intentions. Then, they saw the captain below laughing strangely as he ordered the others to take action. They turned the ship around and made it look like they wanted to escape but were somewhat flustered. At the same time, they deliberately slowed down a little so that the pirates in front would feel that they could catch up. As expected, the enemy soon fell into the trap. A bare-chested pirate leader with a bearded face and a wolf head tattoo on his chest stood under the mast of the dragon-headed warship and shouted to his men beside him, "Don't fire. Get closer. Their speed is not as fast as ours. Prepare for boarding battle. This time we have to take down the goods along with the ship." The spoils of war that pirates looted from merchant ships were of various grades. The most valuable items were not necessarily the goods on the ship. Sometimes the value of the merchant ship itself was higher than the goods. Therefore, when the conditions allowed, pirates preferred to board ships to defeat their enemies. This way, not only would they not destroy the valuable goods on the ship, but they could also bring the ship back with them. Soren's pirate leader used this to attract the pirates, making them feel that they could catch up. This way they would approach the ship and fight. They won the battle. Soren's ship was theirs. They lost the battle. Their ship naturally belonged to Soren. Waves of shouts and howls came closer and closer. The northern pirates in front of them were so excited that they cried like ghosts and howled like wolves. From time to time, some of them even roared like battle cries. Their faces were full of excitement because they realized that there were not many people on the ship. When both sides could see each other, the northern pirates immediately swung their ropes over. Bang! The hulls of the two ships collided slightly. About 20 northern pirates roared and rushed over. Behind them, about 30 pirates were preparing to board the ship. Clap! Clap! Soren, who had been sitting by the side and watching the show, clapped his hands. Then a large group of fierce-looking pirates with scars all over their bodies rushed out of the cabin. The pirates' intuition was actually quite sharp. When the group of northern pirates swung their ropes over to Soren's ship, they immediately realized that the ship in front of them was not a merchant ship. This was because the sailors in front of them did not show any signs of fear. They did not even show any signs of nervousness. Among the many scarred sailors in front of them, there were actually some who were excitedly licking their knives. Their expressions were even more ferocious and cruel than the pirates, as if they were lambs that had sent themselves to their doorstep. Kiki. A burly pirate carrying a battle axe that weighed more than 100 pounds rushed over. He was the ship's field commander. He seemed to have a trace of some other bloodline. He was about 2 meters tall. Howling excitedly, he directly swung his battle axe and split one of the northern pirates in half. Then he roared, "Guys! Kill these idiots! You're looking for your own death. Raise the battle flag. Let these guys die a little more knowing." Suddenly, the pirates who rushed out of the cabin were extremely ferocious. With just a round of attacks, they directly knocked down the northern pirates who rushed over. Then, one of the nimble pirates went over to raise the battle flag, while the others rushed over to the opposite pirate ship. The battle was naturally not to repel the enemy's attack, but to take away their warship. A black flag was raised. There seemed to be a commotion on the opposite pirate ship. One of them seemed to recognize the flag and exclaimed, "It's the throat cutter. It's the flag of the Southern Pirate King." There was a commotion. The northern pirates in front of them seemed to be frightened. Then, when Soren's elite pirates rushed over, they were immediately thrown into chaos. The battle had been going on for so long. There was almost no need for Soren to do anything. The elite pirates that he brought back from the outer islands under his command only needed 2 rounds of attacks to defeat the northern pirates. Some of them even threw away their weapons and surrendered. However, this proportion was obviously much less than the southern pirates who surrendered in the battle. They were obviously weaker than Soren in terms of strength and numbers, but there were still some northern pirates who were desperately fighting. This might have something to do with their traditions. There were many traditions among the northern pirates that advocated death in battle. They believed that the souls of those who died in battle were more noble than those who died of old age or illness. And in the southern pirates' customs, they would not fight to the death if they could live. Swoosh. Soren did not join the boarding battle. His identity was now different, and sometimes there was no need to rush to the front line. However, he also needed to gain some slaughter EXP, so when the battle began he took out the Elven War Bow +2, that Dark Blade gave him. Shooting with a war bow in a naval battle was actually quite fun. Soren specifically chose to shoot the wounded enemy pirates. With his strong basic attributes as support, the probability of hitting the enemy was quite high. Not to mention he also had the lucky gold coin which gave him a permanent +1 luck bonus. Soren killed the northern pirates in front of him one by one. Although his mastery of the bow was not very good, it would not be a problem if he accidentally killed his own men. After all, he could still gain slaughter EXP. Fortunately, this did not happen. Soren harvested 7 or 8 heads one after another, and then all the northern pirates who were desperately resisting were shot dead. The battle was over. The whole process took less than 10 minutes, and the northern pirates who wanted to rob Soren were robbed instead. Soren's fleet had one more warship. Take them down and interrogate them. Soren frowned as he looked at the bloodstains on the deck. He then put away the Elven War Bow and ordered, "See if you can get anything useful out of them. Then get someone to clean up the bodies and clean up all the bloodstains on the deck. This time we are going to the North Coast City. Try not to cause any unnecessary trouble." "Yes, Your Excellency." A burly man with a battle axe that weighed more than 100 pounds bowed respectfully. Then, when he turned around and ordered the other pirates to clean up the bodies, his expression was quite fierce and arrogant. He looked a little arrogant. As the elite pirates under Soren, many of them had a strange temper. But no matter how strange their tempers were, these people were respectful in front of Soren. They would only become arrogant and domineering when facing others. There were pirates cleaning up the battlefield and collecting the spoils on the bodies. Some of them went to the opposite pirate ship. They might need to bring the ship back to Shipwreck Bay. Behind the deck was a group of captured enemies. Next to them were elite pirates who were watching over them. There was a ferocious-looking executioner who was interrogating them. From time to time, screams could be heard. After such a series of battles, the survival of the fittest among Soren's men had finally cultivated a group of elite troops that could be used in battle. About a few minutes later, the pirate in charge of interrogating ran over and whispered something in Soren's ear. Then Soren stood up in surprise and frowned. "Dragon? Are you sure he's not lying?" Standing in front of Soren was a pirate with a rather ugly face. He patted his chest and promised, "Your Excellency. With my years of experience, they can't hide from me if they're lying. And there are others below who know a little bit about it. These guys came to the northwest for this matter." "Is that so?" Soren nodded slightly and showed a thoughtful expression. After a while, he looked up and glanced at the others and said in a deep voice, "Don't leak the news. Although it's just an adult white dragon, it looks like it's worth our time." Chapter 298. Slaying a Dragon. Thinking of this, Soren's expression could not help but become a little excited. For any adventurer, slaying a dragon was a very meaningful thing. Not only did it represent a dangerous challenge, but it also represented an amazing reward at the same time. Although Soren had encountered a lot of dragons during this period of time, they were basically all subspecies of dragons. This time he had the opportunity to kill a pure-blood dragon, so he would not miss it no matter what. White Dragon. An adult white dragon. Although the white dragon was very weak among the pure-blooded dragon species, it was much stronger than other sub-dragon species. An adult white dragon also had the strength of a legendary level. Its frost dragon breath could freeze a person into ice in an instant. As a pure-blood dragon, the white dragon also had a natural dragon template. Their spoils of war were 3 times the standard, their vitality was stronger than most monsters, and at the same time, they also had extremely tough dragon skin and dangerous dragon claws and fangs. The basic health of an adult white dragon was more than 20 points. Under normal circumstances, their vitality was quite strong. Many people used to think that the white dragon was the weakest among the pure-blood dragons, so they looked down on it. However, when the time came, they realized that even though the white dragon was the weakest among the dragons, it was still much more dangerous than other creatures. The challenge rating of an adult white dragon was 16. If it had rare grade items and 1 or 2 legendary equipment, this challenge rating could be lowered to 12. It was difficult for ordinary weapons to break the white dragon's skin and scales, so at least a grade 1 rare grade weapon was needed to deal with it. There was a period of decline for the dragons. The specific reason was not known, but there was a period of time when the pure-blood dragons could not cast many spells. Sometimes they could not even cast as many spells as the dragon disciple sorcerers. Therefore, during that period of time, the dragons were the easiest to kill. It was roughly around the time of the Silver Age in the Arcane Empire. During this period of time, the dragon's ability declined for some reason, and their general challenge rating was lowered by about 2 to 5 levels. Then, after the Arcane Empire, the dragons became a lot stronger. Originally, the adult white dragon could only cast Wind, which basically relied on its claws and fangs to attack. But now it could cast Fog and Ice Wall. Wizards believed that this fluctuation in ability was related to the elemental tide, but the specifics were still unconfirmed. Note: adepts believe that the elementium in the world will move like the tides of the sea. This ebb and flow will affect the elementium energy structure of the world. Therefore, a species like the dragon race that relied solely on their innate abilities would easily be affected by the elemental tide and experience changes in their overall abilities. However, the time span of this change is over thousands of years. Soren wasn't too sure about the growth conditions of the dragon clan. However, based on his past experience, he knew that dragons that lived in special environments would have 1 or 2 more spells than other dragons of the same species. The information that his subordinates had interrogated was actually not very complete. Because even these pirates had only heard that an adult white dragon had flown over here, and that the white dragon seemed to be slightly injured, swaying a little when it flew. After receiving the news, they sent people to the north to inquire about the situation. Yesterday morning, they just learned that a white dragon had attacked humans near the deepwater port. This white dragon that suddenly appeared near the human town caused a lot of panic. In the end, the Chamber of Commerce was forced to pool money and hire adventurers to deal with it. At that time, it attracted a lot of adventurers from the north. However, in the end, it seemed that they didn't succeed in killing the white dragon. They only injured it a little, and more than half of the adventurers who dealt with it died. After the white dragon encountered the adventurers, it flew to the sea, and then it happened to be seen by some people. The news also spread to some people. These pirates went in the direction of the white dragon to try their luck and see if they could find its resting place. However, they didn't expect that they would unfortunately meet Soren. According to Soren's judgment, the white dragon's nest might be on an island in the middle of the sea, because dragons would not build their nests near human settlements. It must be for some reason that it appeared in a place called the Deepwater Port. However, it seemed that after being injured, the white dragon wisely chose to leave and wanted to fly back to its nest to recuperate. There were many dragon subspecies in the north. However, there weren't many pure-blooded dragons. The number of white dragons was also relatively small. They were mainly distributed in the depths of the glacial mountains and the cold islands in the sea. If its nest was near the deepwater port, it would be difficult for the dragon to abandon its nest and run away according to the dragon's habits. If its nest was in the glacial mountains, then the dragon wouldn't fly to the sea. Therefore, Soren thought that the possibility of its nest being on an island in the north coast was as high as 80%. But the problem now was, there were so many islands in the sea, where would its nest be? Tap tap tap. Soren gently tapped his fingers. After listening to the story, he slowly said, "We only know the direction it flew to, but we don't have the exact location. I'm afraid it's difficult to find its nest in the vast sea. How can this kind of thing take so much effort? No. They must know where the white dragon's nest is. At least they know the approximate location." Soren frowned and stood up. He said in a deep voice, "What about the leader of the northern pirates? Bring their leader here." As Soren's voice fell, the pirates around him couldn't help but look at each other. After a while, seeing Soren's frown getting deeper and deeper, one of them finally mustered up the courage to say, "Your Excellency. Their leader has been shot dead by Your Excellency." Dead. Soren was stunned for a moment, then he rubbed his forehead in annoyance. He didn't have any recollection of it at all. The leader of the northern pirates was too insignificant. Even if someone mentioned him now, Soren couldn't remember when he killed him. He was one of the targets that Soren killed. Torture them. Soren frowned and thought for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "Torture them one by one. I don't believe that they would come here to try their luck just because they saw a dragon fly by without knowing where its nest is." Time couldn't drag on for too long. The dragon race had a strong regenerative ability. If they dragged on for too long and found the white dragon, they would have to face an unharmed giant dragon. The pirates in front of him did not seem to be very strong. They dared to slay the dragon because the white dragon was injured. Therefore, they must be confident that they could find the dragon in a short time and kill it before it recovered from its injuries. Chapter 299. Screams could be heard coming from the cabin. About half an hour later, one of his men came up with a bloody nautical chart and bowed respectfully in front of Soren. "Your Excellency. Everything is out. The dragon might have gone here." The man in front of Soren spread out the nautical chart. It was a map of the south coast, found from the corpse of the northern pirate leader. He pointed at an island in the northwest and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency. It's here. I think it's called Shark Reef. They think that the dragon's lair might be nearby." Hearing this, Soren reached out and took the nautical chart. After looking at it with a frown, he asked, "How is the route? How long will it take?" The man beside him quickly ran down to ask, then came back and said, "Your Excellency. There aren't any dangerous areas on this route, but there are a lot of hidden reefs here, so we need to be careful. In terms of time with our ship, it will take at most 1 day. We should be able to reach this place by tomorrow morning." Shark Reef. Soren tapped his finger on the table, thought for a moment, then opened his eyes and said, "Tell Old Sea Eagle to come here." A minute later, a well-built middle-aged man appeared in front of Soren. Unlike the other pirates under Soren's command, Old Sea Eagle seemed to have the demeanor of a noble. It was a very special temperament, and it was different from the other pirate leaders under Soren's command. This middle-aged man was indeed a small noble, a lord of the south coast. Unfortunately, he lost his title and wealth for some reason. In the end, he became a pirate and became a somewhat famous pirate. He was a small pirate leader under Soren's command. There were many people like him under Soren's command. After all, most of the pirates in the south coast had to listen to his command. "Give this letter to the master of the wizard tower." Soren raised his head and looked at the middle-aged man in front of him. He took out a quill and quickly wrote a letter. Then he sealed it with wax and handed it to the middle-aged man. He ordered, "Send the gifts on the ship over later. I've already arranged the location and route for you. You can take the test at the estuary and head to Ice River City. After you deliver the gifts, you just have to wait there. If the master of the sorcerer tower has anything she wants to ask you, just answer her." There were valuable gifts on this ship. Soren did not plan to use this ship to challenge the white dragon. After all, it was an adult giant dragon. Giant dragons could easily overturn a ship if they went all out. Therefore, he decided to divide his troops into 2 groups. He would let his trusted subordinates deliver the gift to Gloria's wizard tower, and then he would take part of the elite troops to search for the white dragon. A pure-blooded adult dragon species should not be given up so easily, not to mention that it was injured. Soren planned to use the northern pirates' ship to find it. Even if it was damaged, he would not feel bad. The middle-aged man in front of him nodded gently, then he put away the letter and respectfully said, "Don't worry. The gifts will be delivered in perfect condition." "Good." Soren looked at him with satisfaction and reminded him, "Don't trespass the wizard tower. Just send the message as I said. She should meet you after she knows the news." "Okay. You can go now." Soren had always been a strict person. After he decided to divide his troops, he immediately ordered his subordinates to set sail for the northern wizard tower. He himself went to the dragon-headed warship that captured the pirates. It was not necessarily useful to deal with a giant dragon because many people could only stare blankly when the dragon flew into the sky. Therefore he only brought the elite pirates with him. There were only about 20 of them. As for the captured pirates, they were still kept on the ship. If they could be recruited, they would be recruited. If not, they would be sent to do manual labor. Otherwise, Soren would have already harvested their heads. Soren actually had a lot of men under his command, but compared to the other two pirate kings, they were still a little lacking. If he wanted to fight the pirate king Ashrod in the future, he was afraid that he would lack stronger elite pirates. These northern pirates were basically grade 2 and above. With a little training and more experience, they would be able to become grade 3 pirates. These were the backbone of the pirates. The two warships soon separated. Soren's original ship continued to sail to deliver the gift to the northern tower, and at the same time, it brought a letter from him. As for the dragon-headed warship from the northern pirates, it went to a place called Shark Reef. That was the place where the white dragon most likely built its nest. If it was found, Soren would kill it. If not, Soren would give up and go to the north. A day passed very quickly. Because the captives who knew the route were also on the ship, Soren easily passed through the reef. Then, on the morning of the second day, an island appeared in front of him. It looked a little like the distribution of the Spratly Islands. In the vast sea there were dozens of large and small islands. The area was basically not very big, and the smallest was only a few dozen meters wide. However, at a glance, he could see that there was a larger island with a diameter of more than 30 kilometers. The whole island was independent like a cliff, and there was a dense forest on it. Because it was close to the northwest, the terrain of the island was a little strange. If he really wanted to say what it was a bit like the Ice and Fire Island in the Heaven Sword and Dragon Saber. On the north side of the island there was obviously ice and snow, and on the south side of the island there was a volcano. However, it seemed that the volcano had not erupted for a long time. He just did not know if it was an extinct volcano or an active one. This kind of terrain was very attractive to dragons. Many kinds of dragons like to build their nests in such an environment, so the possibility of the white dragon flying here was very high. "Dock." Soren picked up the monocular and looked at the island in front of him, then ordered, "Dock at this better place. Let's go to the island and take a look." About an hour later, the Dragonhead warship docked at one side of the island. Soren brought some of his elite subordinates to the beach, and left 3 to 5 people on the ship to guard it. As soon as he arrived on the island, Soren felt that the situation here was a little strange. The reason was simple. There were very few animals here and the whole island was very quiet. There were not many birds in the dense forest. Under normal circumstances there should be many animals living here, and birds also like to build their nests here. However, it seemed that there was nothing here, which could only mean one thing, and that was that there was a terrifying creature nearby. The most likely was a dragon. Draconic aura was a kind of ability that could cover a large area. Even the weaker white dragon, as a pure-blooded dragon species, had draconic aura. Any creature that came close to it would have to undergo a will immunity test, or else it would be enveloped by fear. Draconic aura would expel other creatures near the dragon's nest, and other creatures would not dare to come close unless they were enslaved by the dragon. It seemed that there were no seabirds here, and it was probably because the dragon would fly by from time to time. Gigi Gulu. Some strange sounds attracted Soren's attention. Just as he raised his hand to signal the others to be careful, a sharp sword suddenly shot out from the forest and directly hit one of his subordinates. Then he saw the bushes in front of him shake, and dozens of short humanoid creatures with messy hair and oil paint rushed out. They held simple weapons in their hands, but their movements were fast and fierce. These humanoid creatures had the same outline as humans, but they were very thin and small like monkeys. They were about 1.2 to 1.4 meters tall, and their movements were very fast. Their eyes were wild and fierce, and they roared as they rushed over as if they wanted to kill all of them. "It's the barbarians." A pirate captain shouted and said in a deep voice, "Everyone be careful. These barbarians are very agile. Be careful of their weapons, they might be poisoned." Shoo. A sword appeared in Soren's palm, but then something unexpected happened. His own sword did not hit the barbarian in front of him. The barbarian's short body was able to dodge in mid-air, and when its body was in the air, there was basically no point for it to dodge Soren's attack. But that was all it could do. After Soren's attack missed, a cold light appeared in his other hand, and then the barbarian in front of him was cut in half. Sword form, waist cut. Soren put away his sword to defend, and held a curved sword in each hand to block the attack of another short barbarian. Then he jumped back 3 steps and rushed forward to perform, sword form, spinning strike. Puchi. Streams of blood splattered into the air. A series of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Target killed. You successfully activated, sword form, waist cut. You dealt 76 damage to the target, heavy hit. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You've gained 1800 slaughter EXP. Target killed. You successfully activated, spinning strike. You dealt 56 damage to the target, heavy hit. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You've gained 1560 slaughter EXP. A series of slaughter EXP notifications appeared. Soren was very surprised to find that the barbarians in front of him were probably grade 2 or above, but most of their dexterity was above 20 points. At the same time, the slaughter EXP they gave seemed to be about 50% higher than the enemies of the same grade that Soren had dealt with before. The barbarians in front of him basically had around 1500 slaughter EXP. Chapter 300. A series of screams were heard. Although a large number of the savages in front of them were killed, the pirates that Soren brought over also suffered a lot of losses. Because these savages used simple weapons in order to pursue lethality, they smeared poison on their weapons. This kind of poison weapon was more troublesome as long as it hurt people. Fortunately, these pirates were all elite troops and most of them had a decent physique. Otherwise, they would have died in the first round of the poison test. As long as they survived the test of death, even if they were poisoned, it would not be completely fatal. Because the physique of the professions in this world was generally stronger. Be careful. From time to time, there would be a cry of alarm. The savages in front of them could use blow darts, but they were not metal arrows but wooden ones that were as sharp as toothpicks. This kind of blow darts did not have an anesthetic effect but they were quite poisonous. Several of the elite pirates brought by Soren fell to the ground, but fortunately, the others were experienced in fighting and quickly blocked the attack of the savages. These savages did not have any armor, and they were wearing simple animal skins. As long as they did not dodge the attack, they would be killed in one blow. A cold light of the sword appeared. Soren saw that 3 to 5 of his men had died, and the murderous intent in his heart became stronger and stronger. He used the curved sword with both hands to activate the last haste on a rare grade item, and then his whole body turned into a shadow and rushed into the savages. With the effect of haste, it was much easier to deal with these savages. Soren's 2 swords danced wildly and turned into a sky full of light. Blood splashed in front of his eyes and heads fell to the ground. In just a few minutes, more than 10 savages were beheaded. Gulagalahi. Strange sounds were heard. Seeing that they were no match for these people in front of them, the savages actually ran away directly. More than 20 savages that rushed in at the beginning died, and the remaining 10 or so relied on their agile hands to escape back into the forest. These savages' climbing ability was very strong. After getting into the forest, only the leaves and shrubs could be seen shaking, and then they disappeared in a moment. Soren did not let his pirates chase after them. Instead, he looked at the other wounded and ordered, "Take the wounded to the ship, the rest of you follow me to go around here." The savages were widely distributed. On the islands within the range of the sea, the figures of the indigenous people could often be seen. Soren touched the bodies of the savages in front of him and found some strange signs. Then he found a sculpture carved out of wood on one of the savages who looked like the leader. This sculpture was a bit like a totem, but it was not the beast that Soren was familiar with, but it looked like a hovering dragon. That's right. The more he looked at it, the more it looked like a dragon. Soren's face when he saw it, and he was a little bit excited. "Be careful. There should be a dragon here." Here. Of the savages were of the savages. Of the savages of course they were not enslaved by humans. Instead they were enslaved by some powerful and terrifying creatures, such as the giant dragon that set its nest here. Of soft them. Of soft them. Of the soft them. Dragons actually had strong enslavement abilities. They could enslave most of the monsters, including subspecies of dragons and those of their own kind that were weaker than them. Therefore, you should never think that you only need to face a dragon when you want to slay a dragon. In the past, many people thought that they could slay a dragon just by reading a little guide. They took for granted that dragons were the kind of creatures that would fight on the ground. As a result, when they really encountered a dragon, they were all dumbfounded. Warriors could not fly to the sky to attack, wizard spell damage was not enough, and archers could not break the dragon's scales. When the dragon swooped down and gave them a chance to attack, it often meant a fatal attack. If a falcon's dive could tear through leather armor, then how much damage could a dragon's dive do? Soren remembered this very early on. As a melee profession, he must try his best to prevent the dragon from flying to the sky to fight. Because at that time, it had the initiative. And because it could escape at any time. After all, this world still had its own rules. Even the legendary sword saint's explosive power on the ground was so terrifying that it may be able to kill a pure-blooded dragon in 1 or 2 rounds. However, he still couldn't use do chi or anything like that to fly. Most melee professions were at a disadvantage in the air, unless they increased their strength to the level of a saint. Bring the things here. Soren jumped onto a cliff, looked at the surrounding environment, and then looked at the north side of the island covered with ice and snow. Then he jumped down from above and ordered his men, "Bring all the things I prepared at the beginning." Yes. Soon his men returned to the ship. About 10 minutes later, someone ran over with a bundle of javelins. These javelins looked a bit like spears, and some of them were connected to chains. There were also heavy javelins made of steel. They looked like short javelins made of pure steel, but they were used as throwing weapons. "Take 2 each." Soren looked at the pirates behind him and ordered in a deep voice, "Leave the rest to me. When the opportunity arises, attack its wings." Dragons were very powerful. Even a white dragon was quite dangerous. The dragon's scales and dragon skin on its body had very strong defensive capabilities. Even if you broke the dragon's scales, you would still have to face a layer of tough dragon skin. So from ancient times to the present, in the anecdotes of bards, it seemed that the most important thing was to find a weapon that could break the dragon's defense. But in fact, only those who had really slain dragons knew that the most important thing to do was to destroy their ability to fly. There was a saying, "To shoot a man, shoot the horse. To catch bandits, capture the king." The dragon's wings were the only place on the dragon's body that was not covered by dragon scales. It was also the place with the largest area of defense and the weakest defense. Although this place was not fatal to the dragon at all. But the strategic significance of attacking this place was quite huge. It was equivalent to destroying half of the dragon's flexibility, and also making it unable to use dragon wing flaps, dive attacks, dragon wing sweeps, and so on. The protagonist in the anecdotes of bards could stupidly attack the dragon's fatal point, and then after a back-and-forth struggle, suddenly seize the opportunity to kill the dragon with more than half of its HP left. But if you played like this, you would definitely die miserably in the end. Heavy weapons were needed to deal with the dragon. The javelins that Soren brought over were quite important props. Chapter 301. There were many exotic flowers and herbs on this island. Unfortunately, Soren didn't know much about the herbology branch of alchemy, so he couldn't identify the medicinal properties of these plants. He took his men around the island from the side, and he could feel that the closer they got to the north of the island, the lower the temperature was. This was a very rare phenomenon, probably due to the geothermal heat emitted by the volcano in the south of the island. The north of the island was covered with ice and snow, but it was mainly concentrated in one area. Soren judged that it was most likely the white dragon's nest. Because there was a dragon living here, it was almost impossible to see any other beasts. Soren and his men walked for about half an hour before they finally got close to the snow-covered mountain. The surrounding cliffs were very smooth and steep, and they were also covered with a layer of ice. It didn't look like a natural situation, but more like a deliberate arrangement by some creatures. Dragons like to make their nests as steep as 90-degree mountain walls, so that other creatures that could not fly would not be able to get close to them. As for the white dragons, whose abilities were slightly weaker than the other giant dragons, they also liked to use their dragon breath to cover the vicinity of their lairs with ice. This kind of ice would make it very difficult to climb around the cliffs, and any enemy that dared to challenge it near its nest would be negatively affected by the ice walk status. They would have to do a reflex appraisal related to agility when moving, or they might slip and make mistakes in their attacks. However, white dragons didn't have such a problem because they were born with a special ability called Ice Walk. The Ice Quetzalcoatlus that Soren fought in the past had part of the white dragon's bloodline, so they also liked to cover their nests with ice. Details in Volume 1, Hide. Soren gestured to the other men behind him and said in a deep voice, "You guys stay nearby. I will find a way to lure the white dragon out of its nest, and then you guys find a chance to attack its wings with heavy javelins." Heavy weapons had a natural armor penetration ability. It could be simply understood that heavy weapons were much better than ordinary swords to deal with a knight's plate armor. These heavy javelins had a hidden armor penetration ability. It might be a little difficult to throw them out to break the dragon's scales, but it was quite easy to break the dragon's wings. There were obvious barbs on the javelins which looked similar to the barbs on a spear. Some of the javelins were even connected to a chain, while the other end was a heavy steel javelin. What kind of weapon, if used properly, could lock a dragon's wings and make it completely lose its ability to fly? Unless the dragon forcibly tore off the javelin along with the flesh of the dragon's wings. Shadow hide. Soren's figure slowly disappeared into the shadows. He scanned his surroundings and approached the mountain wall on his right. Because it was covered with a layer of ice, the entire mountain wall was very smooth. If it was anyone else, it would be impossible to climb up. However, for Soren, who had 25 points of agility, this wasn't a problem at all. A pair of daggers appeared in his hands, and he quietly climbed up the mountain. Soon he reached an open platform on the mountain wall. This was a very big platform. The diameter was probably more than 50 meters. It was difficult for nature to create such a neat platform. Soren just glanced at it and knew that it was prepared for him by the dragon. Dragons flew like eagles. They liked to swoop down from high places and soar into the sky with a flap of their wings. Therefore, many of them would prepare such a platform for themselves. Even the dragons that occupied ancient castles liked to swoop down from the highest point of the castle when they flew. This was a habit. After walking along the platform for a little distance to the left, Soren felt that something was wrong. It was an indescribable feeling. It was as if his whole body was involuntarily breathing heavily, his heart was beating faster, as if he was frightened. His back was covered with goosebumps, and there was an inexplicable sense of powerlessness and exhaustion. It felt like he had a bad cold and his whole body was weak. This was draconic aura. Almost at the same time as this feeling appeared, a row of data appeared, affected by draconic aura. Triggered test of will. Test of will passed. You have successfully avoided the negative effect of draconic aura. You have successfully avoided the fear effect of draconic aura. The feeling of powerlessness gradually subsided. It didn't last long and Soren gradually returned to normal. One of the most troublesome things to deal with when slaying a dragon was the draconic aura of a pure-blooded dragon. This was a permanent ability that didn't need to be activated. It was also a natural ability that dragons had. They could exert their draconic aura on any creature that came within a certain range of them. This kind of draconic aura ignored both friend and foe. Although it couldn't directly kill the enemy, it could create a deterrent effect. It could be said that it was quite useful to deal with creatures that were weaker and didn't have strong wills. Most of the dragons used draconic aura to open up a path for their slaves, and it was easy to subdue some monsters. Ordinary people couldn't withstand draconic aura. Therefore, using human wave tactics to deal with dragons wasn't necessarily useful. This was because the sight of a dragon would frighten many ordinary soldiers, and they wouldn't be able to fight in the end. The specific effect could be imagined as a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a group of wild elephants rushing towards you, and then you would have a long sword and a shield in your hands. In this situation, if you had the courage to stand still and fight, then your will would definitely pass. If you couldn't do this, you might fail to resist draconic aura. Will assessment 16+. Soren was a person who valued the will attribute very much, so it wasn't surprising that he was immune to the negative effects of draconic aura. However, whether the pirates he brought along could successfully resist the negative effects of draconic aura would depend on whether their will was strong enough. However, people who sailed on the sea all year round, withstood the storms and waves, and often faced the dangers of killing and fighting sea monsters would definitely have a stronger will than others. What was really important? Ever since Soren went to the abyss of hell, he deeply understood this point. From the side to the entrance of the dragon's cave, Soren quickly found his target. It was a huge adult white dragon. The depth of the dragon's cave wasn't very high. In fact, adult dragons were more impatient. They sometimes appeared a little careless, just like young people who had just reached adulthood who were easily impulsive. Only when they entered their old age would they begin to become cunning. At that time, they began to avoid direct combat and liked to use traps to deal with intruders. Their dragon's cave would gradually become a huge maze over a long period of time, and then the treasures would begin to be hidden deeper and deeper. Some dangerous monster guards would also begin to appear in the maze, such as the most common Tauren and so on. As for ancient dragons, just think of the ancient red dragon in Whiterun City. Until now, other people thought that it was just an adult red dragon that appeared there. It was estimated that it would take a while for others to discover that there was an ancient red dragon hidden there. Then, it would cause a huge uproar in the southern plains and cause a lot of panic. At that time, it would be a big scene, but Soren didn't know if the development of the situation would be the same as what he knew in the past. If there were conditions, he would still try his luck in the future because there was a divine artifact in this ancient red dragon's cave. White Dragon. The weakest of the chromatic dragons, a creature of the chaotic evil alignment. The dragon's cave in front of him was similar to the one in Soren's memory. White dragons like to dig their dragon's nest down. Although the dragon's nest was on a higher mountain, the cave's entrance was sunken downwards, and the surroundings were frozen because of its ice dragon breath. It looked like a huge ice cellar. White dragons were not picky when it came to food. Like other dragons, they could eat almost anything. The digestive ability of dragons was as brittle as steel. However, white dragons preferred to freeze their prey with their dragon breath before eating it. Many white dragons lived in overseas areas and would dive into the sea to hunt for fish. There was one more important thing. White dragons were the dragons that liked to attack from high places the most, and they would always use their dragon breath for their first attack. This was because white dragons could use their dragon breath more than other dragons. When a white dragon was in its infant stage, its scales would reflect light like a mirror. As it grew older, the luster would gradually disappear. When it reached adulthood, the characteristics of a white dragon would become grayish-white. This was an important basis to judge the strength of a white dragon. Soren only glanced into the dragon's cave and roughly judged that this was a white dragon that was in its late adult stage. It was close to its prime. Most of the dragons could be judged based on age. Their strength could be calculated based on their age. Their growth stages were Baby Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 1, Infant Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 4, Juvenile Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 7, Adolescent Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 10, Adult Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 13, Adult Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 16, Old Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 19, and Old Dragon Stage, Challenge Rating 21. Basically, a white dragon would reach this stage. Further up were the ancient dragons. These dragons basically had divinity. It could be said that the difficulty of fighting them was not much different from challenging the saints. Therefore, killing ancient dragons and ancient dragons required a lot of luck. The white dragon in front of him was transitioning from its adult stage to its prime stage. This was not good news. This was because pure-blooded dragons, even the weakest white dragon among the pentashade dragons, would have an additional physical resistance and magic resistance when they transition from their adult stage to their prime stage. They would be immune to any physical damage and magic damage below 10 points. This natural talent would gradually increase over time, and in the end, it could evolve into immunity to certain types of damage. Fortunately, when these dragons were killed, their dragon scales and dragon skin would inherit part of the defensive resistance, which could be directly made into first-rate rare-grade equipment. This was a little troublesome. Soren quietly watched the adult white dragon, which was about 50 feet long in his sight, and carefully moved towards it. Chapter 302. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. Soren's footsteps were getting lighter and lighter, and his speed was getting slower and slower. Dragons had excellent hearing abilities. Even with Soren's high dexterity, it was still possible for the dragon to detect him sneaking in. Fortunately, it was a white dragon in front of him. It didn't have a high level of magic and only had some spell-like abilities. Otherwise, Soren would have to be careful of magic traps when sneaking in. Once a dragon's nest had evolved into a maze over time, there would definitely be a lot of traps. The adult dragon in front of him seemed to be sleeping, but that didn't mean it couldn't sense the outside world. Sleeping was a very important process in a dragon's life. They still retained about 50% of their basic abilities while sleeping, and could sense other creatures approaching or slightly heavier footsteps. While sleeping, the dragon's abilities would gradually increase, and at the same time, its injuries would recover at a faster rate. This required it to eat a lot of prey in advance. Soren saw that the adult white dragon was recovering from its injuries. He noticed that there was a wound on the left wing of the white dragon. The wound was about 30 centimeters long and 5 centimeters deep. It seemed to be caused by a two-handed heavy sword. This would affect the white dragon's ability to fly. Then there was another wound on the white dragon's throat. There were small, dense scales there. The seemingly weak defense was actually the toughest part of the dragon's body. It was difficult for ordinary weapons to break through. The one who attacked it must have used a long sword or a rapier. The wound was small, but it was very deep. It seemed that the person who attacked it had a dragon-slaying weapon. When dealing with any pure-blooded dragon, you could imagine that most of its body was covered in full-body armor. In the anecdotes of bards, there was always a place on the dragon's body called the reverse scale. This was the dragon's fatal point. As long as you hit the reverse scale, you could kill the dragon even if it didn't hurt its heart. But in reality, dragons didn't have reverse scales. They had weak spots on their body, but they definitely didn't have a fatal reverse scale. No one knew when it started, but there was this saying in the bard's stories. Many people believed it to be true, and many naive adventurers thought that they could easily slay a dragon if they found the reverse scale. After all, the stories always said that the hero hit the dragon's fatal point and killed it instantly. Its defense must be at least 25. Soren closed the distance to about 20 meters and observed the body of the adult white dragon in front of him, mainly the color, thickness, and distribution of the scales. Based on his rich experience, Soren could tell that the adult giant dragon in front of him had a defense level of around 25 points. In other words, the dragon scales and dragon skin that covered the surface of its body could resist close to 25 points of physical damage. This defensive strength was equivalent to an adult man holding a weapon with both hands and attacking with all his strength. In other words, an adult man wielding a two-handed weapon and attacking with all his might only be able to break through the dragon's defense. It was just enough to break through his defense, and the damage was probably less than 3 points. Soren had a serious expression on his face as he sneaked closer to the other side. At the same time, he thought to himself, with the elite pirates that I brought with me, it shouldn't be a problem to break through its dragon-scale defense. But if it doesn't deal any heavy damage, it's estimated that the damage will be in the single digits. This was not a good thing. It was not easy to kill an adult giant dragon with just Soren's damage output alone. Following the side of the dragon's nest, Soren could see a pile of treasures. Because there were not many of them, they were directly covered by the huge body of the giant dragon. As the weakest white dragon among the chromatic dragons, although it had accumulated wealth to adulthood and had double to triple the loot standard, the treasures it had were not as exaggerated as the red dragons. Because the red dragon was the most powerful chromatic dragon, and it was also an evil giant dragon that liked to collect loot. However, in front of Soren's eyes, there were some small things that were sparkling and refracting light. Those were diamonds. The white dragon was one of the giant dragons that liked diamonds the most. As long as they found a diamond, they would always find a way to take it for themselves, unless this behavior was very dangerous. Among all the gems, the white dragon liked diamonds the most. Therefore, in almost any adult white dragon's nest, there were some eye-catching diamonds that could be found. Therefore, in the treasure that the white dragon did not seem to be rich, it was often possible to hide a valuable loot. The key was the number of diamonds. After all, this thing could be sold for a very high price as long as one piece. There was not much gold in the dragon's nest. Because it was close to the sea, Soren could hardly see much kindler. Most of it was fine gold sand and gold nuggets. There were not many gems, but there were a lot of diamonds mixed in. Soren saw nearly a dozen pieces. There was a moment of pause. Soren squatted in the corner and memorized the environment of the entire dragon's nest. At the same time, his brain began to make tactical arrangements. He had 2 plans. The first was to take advantage of the fact that the giant dragon had not discovered him and quickly pull out the legendary curved sword Icing Death to attack. As long as the distance was within 10 meters, even if the dragon's perception found him, Soren could still fight for 2 or 3 opportunities to attack. If he was lucky enough to hit the leader's vital point, Soren could cause a lot of damage to the enemy at the beginning of the battle. But in this case, the next battle would not be easy. Because the space in the dragon's nest was too narrow, the white dragon would definitely spit out dragon's breath when it reacted. At that time, Soren would have nowhere to hide. Never take the dragon's breath head-on. This was a special point in the rules of dragon slaying. The second plan was to lure the white dragon out so that there would be no chance for a sneak attack. But it could also make the white dragon think that he was a thief who sneaked into the dragon's nest. Under normal circumstances, the white dragon would definitely chase him out of the nest. In this way, Soren could lead it down and give the ambushing elite pirates a chance to attack. If he could keep the white dragon on the ground, the final victory would be as high as 80%. Soren made a plan in his mind. His figure suddenly flew out and rushed directly to the white dragon in front of him. Then he reached out and grabbed the treasure under it, grabbing a lot of gold and diamonds in one breath. After getting the treasure, Soren immediately retreated. Almost when he was about 5 meters away from the treasure, the sleeping giant dragon also moved slightly as if it sensed something, and then suddenly opened its huge dragon eyes. Dragon sense, 10 meters. Soren's figure had almost escaped to the outside of the dragon's nest, and only a blurry background could be seen. Roar! An angry roar sounded. The adult white dragon in front of him suddenly opened its eyes and stood up. It actually opened its mouth and said angrily in the common language, "Despicable thief." It was not an ordinary white dragon. It was not those beast-like white dragons without much wisdom. Being able to use the common language meant that there was something different about it. Chapter 303. It's been a month and a half. It seems that since he quit smoking, Fuda has been catching colds easily. He slept all day and only woke up once today. Fuda is still a little dizzy. Rumble. Heavy footsteps came from the dragon's nest. Soren didn't need to look back to know that the white dragon had woken up and was catching up from behind. Dragons had a close-range perception ability. Any creature that got close to them could be directly detected by them. Even the best halflings in the Shire could not avoid this because it was a supernatural sixth sense. The white dragon's nest was not big, which led to it rushing out quite quickly. Almost as soon as Soren's front foot ran out, the huge body of the white dragon rushed out behind him. Ice dragon breath. A cold dragon breath came out from behind Soren. Under this piercing dragon breath, the ground was frozen into ice at a speed visible to the naked eye, and soon a new layer of ice appeared in place. The white dragon's ice dragon breath was the weakest among the pure-blooded dragon species. Its lethality was only half of the red dragon breath, but it was the most used dragon breath attack. The dragon breath of an adult white dragon could freeze a man into an ice sculpture, and then with a wave of its dragon claws, the man would shatter like broken ice. The scene was quite tragic. Soren dove out of the attack range of the ice dragon breath, but there was still a little cold air on his clothes, and soon a piece of frost could be seen on his clothes. The ice dragon breath of an adult white dragon could cause about 40 points of ice damage. It was an all-shaped attack that covered a large area. This kind of ice damage was still within Soren's tolerance range. If it was the dragon breath of an adult red dragon, he was afraid that he would lose half his life just by touching it. Whoosh! There was a harsh sound of friction. After Soren rushed out of the dragon's nest, he directly jumped from a height of nearly 100 meters. However, he didn't jump down directly. No matter how high his physique was, he would still fall to his death. He relied on his weapon to reduce the force of the fall and then slid down directly, just like when he fought against the hunters on the cliff in the past. The speed of the descent was quite fast and it bought some time for Soren. So when he was about to reach the ground, the white dragon's huge body appeared at the edge of the cliff. It glanced at Soren, who had slid to the ground, and pounced on him without hesitation. Shameless thief. The white dragon in front of him seemed to have had some special experiences, because under normal circumstances, white dragons would only have relatively high intelligence when they reached old age. At the same time, they would also be able to speak languages other than Draconic. They were the closest to wild beasts among the pure-blooded dragon species. To a large extent, their challenge rating was lowered because of this. The white dragon flapped its wings and stabilized its body just as it was about to reach the ground. This dive had shortened the distance between them by quite a bit. Then it opened its mouth and spat out a dragon's breath that enveloped Soren's body. Dragons didn't have high dexterity. Most of them only had around 10 points, and because of their relatively large size, they couldn't dodge many of the enemy's attacks. However, this didn't mean that they were slow because most of the creatures with large bodies had lower dexterity. In fact, the speed of a giant dragon was comparable to that of a human with haste buff, so Soren was still within the range of its dragon's breath attack. Do it! Soren suddenly shouted and then jumped up. He reached out and grabbed a tree trunk above him, and with a 360-degree turn, he barely dodged the frost dragon's breath attack. But even so, his right hand still touched a little bit of the dragon's breath attack. In the blink of an eye, it was covered with frost and his whole arm felt a little numb. Elemental damage. Soren's legendary curved sword, Icing Death, only had an additional 3 points of cold damage, but the frost dragon's breath attack directly dealt 30 points of elemental damage per second. This was an elemental attack that could freeze blood. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. A group of fierce pirates rushed from both sides. Their eyes were filled with fear and excitement. As soon as they came out, they immediately threw the heavy javelins in their hands. The javelins flew through the air and hit the white dragon's body. Some of them hit its dragon scales, but they barely broke through the defense of the dragon scales. It was like a hammer hitting an iron felt. Most of the javelins were bounced back, but the dragon scales also showed signs of damage and traces of dragon blood seeped out. However, the javelins that hit the dragon's wings didn't bounce back. They directly penetrated the dragon's wings. Because of the barbs on them, they directly hung on the dragon's wings. Chain. When Soren landed, he shook his arm to shake off the frost that came into contact with it. Then he directly picked up a heavy javelin and threw it at the white dragon's left wing. A sharp whistling sound. In the midst of the giant dragon's angry and painful roar, Soren hit its position near the dragon's wing bone. Spread out. 2 curved swords appeared in Soren's hands. The elite pirates in front of him were 3 less. This meant that someone didn't pass the test of draconic aura. This guy didn't dare to join the battle because he didn't have enough willpower. Soren wasn't too surprised by this. It was already good enough that so many of his men could withstand the first round of draconic aura. However, everyone had the courage to face such a huge monster. In the midst of the angry roar, the white dragon rushed towards Soren. As its huge body moved, according to Soren's strategy, the other elite pirates took the opportunity to continue attacking it with their javelins. Many of his men had already discovered the wound on the dragon's wings. The white dragon in front of them was indeed injured at the beginning. This discovery made many of the elite pirates eager to try. Some even pulled out their 2-handed weapons and prepared to hack at the open wound. Idiot! Don't be impulsive. Soren awkwardly rolled away. When he saw the scene behind him, he immediately shouted, "Get out of the way!" Unfortunately, it was too late. The white dragon's attack on Soren was only half a feint. When the most cunning human in front of it dodged its dragon breath, it deliberately turned its back to those pesky insects and seemed to want to take the opportunity to sneak an attack on him. This made a cruel and bloodthirsty look appear in its eyes. As an adult white dragon with a certain amount of wisdom, it was very clear that it was better to get rid of these small fries first. Dragon tail sweep. The adult white dragon's tail was nearly 5 meters long, and the thickness was about the same as an adult's waist. Even the end of the tail was as thick as an adult's thigh. The dragon's tail was also covered with tough dragon scales. When the enemy behind it rushed over, it didn't even need to look back. Its huge dragon eyes moved, and then the thick and long dragon tail was raised high, like the fiercest and most domineering whip, lashing out. Bang! A violent impact sounded. A strong pirate closest to the adult white dragon was directly hit and flew back nearly 12 meters. At this distance, the entire tree trembled when he crashed into it. The others merely glanced at him and discovered that this pirate's ribs had completely caved in. It was as though his entire body had sunk in, as though his chest had been folded in. This was an incomparably tyrannical force that had directly broken his spine. Killed in one blow. In this case, it was basically impossible to survive. Damn it. Soren took a deep breath, and a wisp of blood appeared in his eyes. His breathing began to become heavy, and his heartbeat gradually accelerated. His body temperature rose to nearly 50 degrees, and his heartbeat directly doubled. He dared to challenge a white dragon because this kind of dragon was relatively stupid, and like a beast, it was easy to be baited. However, the white dragon in front of him was obviously smarter. It actually knew that it was better to kill the others first, and it also judged that it would be difficult to kill Soren easily. Soren couldn't let all his men die here. Otherwise, in the end he couldn't even drive the ship back. So he had to fight a tough battle with the adult white dragon in front of him. This kind of excitement of challenging a legendary creature made Soren's heart full of fighting spirit and excitement. Dragons were one of the few creatures that he studied the most. So when the white dragon in front of him turned its head to the back, and at the same time, there were obvious signs of its abdomen bulging, and its whole body showing signs of retreating, as if it was taking a deep breath, he couldn't help but shout, "Dodge! Be careful of the dragon breath." Whoosh! A gust of wind blew. The bone-chilling dragon breath was sprayed out in a large area, covering an area of nearly 15 meters. In this all-shaped dragon breath, 2 elite pirates were enveloped in it. Then they saw that their bodies were frozen at a speed visible to the naked eye. This kind of cold was even more shocking than being directly exposed to the North Pole. It was almost as if their flesh and blood were frozen in just a second or two. Finally, their whole body was like an ice sculpture, completely wrapped in a layer of about 3 centimeters of ice. Boom. The thick and long dragon tail swept over with a whistling sound. The two elite pirates in front of it were like broken glass and porcelain, and directly shattered into pieces of flesh. There was not a drop of blood spilled because the blood had been turned into ice. In the blink of an eye, 3 of their companions died in the hands of the white dragon. The other pirates obviously showed a trace of fear, and nearly half of them took a few steps back, because they found that the dragon was more difficult to deal with than they thought. Most of the people present were not very sure that they could withstand its attack. After all, this was a behemoth of more than 10 meters long and nearly 20 tons in weight. The height of a human was only 1.78 meters and the weight was only about 200 pounds. This kind of difference in size. A casual blow was a crushing and fatal attack. However, at this moment, accompanied by the sound of clang, Soren wielded 2 curved swords at the same time from the sky, like a cheetah pouncing on the back of the white dragon. Sword form, spinning strike. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.